Chapter 314. What method? Hoi Yan's eyes showed some doubt, looking at Lu Qin suspiciously. Lu Qin had no intention of hiding it from him. He beckoned Hoi Yan to come to his side, and the two of them whispered for a while. Then Hoi Yan's expression changed, looking unusually ugly. He shook his head saying, "This won't do." Lu Qin asked, "Why?" Hoi Yan said, "You are a human, so you don't understand the customs of the barbarians of the wilderness. No one has ever done this before." Lu Qin said lightly, "In the past, no tribe has ever been so weak and still dreamed of restoring the glory of their ancestors, right?" Hoi Yan was momentarily stunned, unable to speak for a moment. Lu Qin looked at him and said, "You asked me to help you and I promised I will do my best. Now that the Black Fire tribe is in such a situation, it will be very difficult to revive it. It is inevitable to use some rare methods and take a new path." Hoi Yan still did not nod in agreement, only sitting next to Lu Qin with his back against the stone wall. From afar, people would occasionally glance at the two of them. One was a burly and fierce barbarian, and the other was a reserved, gloomy, and indifferent human. Their appearances were worlds apart, but for some reason when the two sat together, there was a strange sense of harmony. After a while, Hoi Yan said in a low voice, "Is there no other way?" Lu Qin said, "There are other ways, it's not that there aren't any." Hoi Yan's spirit was immediately lifted, saying, "Let's hear it." Lu Qin said, "Then we'll follow the rules of the tribes in this wasteland. We'll quietly develop and have children. We'll take it 1 year at a time, one battle at a time. With my help, dealing with these small tribes shouldn't be a problem. We'll basically be able to defeat them. But the Black Fire tribe only has a small population. Even if you are given a large territory, you won't have anyone to guard it, right? So I think in 30 to 50 years, when the tribe's population has increased, the Black Fire tribe will be able to control the northern border wilderness. And then? You still have the ambition to restore the glory of your ancestors when they were at their peak?" Lu Qin looked at Hoi Yan and said calmly, "According to what you've told me, the territory in the south is 100 times larger than here, and the population of the most powerful tribes is almost 10 times that of the Black Fire tribe. Then what should we do? Let's continue to reproduce. We'll wait for about 100 or 200 years. If there are no natural or man-made disasters under the protection of the Fire God, and there are no attacks from other tribes, and everything is perfect without any mistakes, then when the population of the tribe increases and the number of warriors is enough to fight with those big tribes, maybe we can compete with them. But when that time comes, both of us won't be around anymore, right?" Lu Qin continued to describe the beautiful vision of the Black Fire tribe. Hoi Yan was nodding his head slightly at first, but the more he listened, the uglier his expression became. When he heard the last few words, 100 or 200 years, his entire face darkened. Lu Qin smiled at him and said, "You're unhappy, aren't you? You're not willing, are you?" Then he deliberately pointed at Hoi Yan and said, "You see, although you're a barbarian and I'm a human, our thoughts are the same. You have the ambition, you want to make contributions, you want to become a hero of the Black Fire tribe. Why should you be a stepping stone for others? If that's the case, who will remember you? And even if you're willing, I won't do it." Lu Qin finally said calmly, "I plan to return to the north alive. If we really want to waste our time and die here, then we'll just turn against each other now." Deep into the night, dark clouds covered the stars. On the desolate plains, a group of people and horses quietly advanced under the cover of the night. Hoi Yan and Lu Qin walked at the front of this group of ferocious barbarian warriors. Even further in front of them, in the deep darkness of the night, there was a group of black shadows moving silently in the night. 2 dark green lights flashed in the shadows. That was the Black Wolf Atsu. Hoi Yan looked at the abnormally agile shadow in front of him, his expression somewhat complicated in the darkness. After a while, he said to Lu Qin, "This monster of yours seems to be somewhat different." This time Lu Qin's clothes were not the same as before. His original clothes were gone, and in its place was a completely black, ancient-looking black robe. Even half of his head was covered by a hood, looking a little strange. After hearing Hoi Yan's words, he casually said, "Echem? What's different?" Hoi Yan shook his head and said, "It's too human-like. Ordinary demonic beasts are basically unable to do this. However, in the past, I've heard from the elders in the tribe that there seem to be similar strange demonic beasts in those large tribes." Lu Qin's eyes flashed and he asked, "What kind of monsters are there in the big tribes?" Hoi Yan thought for a while and said, "I can't say for sure, I've actually never seen it with my own eyes. But I heard that those especially powerful, especially human-like and intelligent monsters are usually under the command of the most powerful shaman venerable. Most people call them holy beasts." Lu Chen's footsteps slightly paused, then he said, "If only the Atsu was really a holy beast." Huoyan laughed and said, "That's right." Lu Chen immediately changed the topic, pointing at the black robe he was wearing and said, "Must I wear this robe of yours?" Huoyan immediately nodded and said, "Yes, this is the only priest robe that has been passed down from the ancestors of our Black Fire tribe. This is the tribe's rule." "Rule?" Lu Chen looked at him and said, "The matter that we talked about when we came out, have you thought about it?" Huoyan was silent for a while, then said, "Yes, we'll do as you say. But before that we have to at least win this battle." Lu Chen had a faint smile on his face, nodded and said, "Don't worry." Huoyan also seemed to feel a little awkward, and after a dry cough he said, "I feel that the Divine Wood tribe's base was not damaged after the sneak attack. They should be on guard these days." Lu Chen said, "I also feel that they should be on guard. But so many days have passed, they can't be on guard every day, they will eventually relax a little. Moreover, we can win tonight's battle without a sneak attack." Huoyan took a deep breath and said, "Why are you always so confident?" Lu Chen grinned and said, "Don't you believe that the fire god is protecting you?" "I believe." Huoyan was obviously stunned for a moment, and finally replied in a muffled voice. For this long-distance attack, the Black Fire tribe did not send out all their warriors, but those who were able to come out were all elite warriors who had experienced hundreds of battles. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were the strongest fighting force of the Black Fire tribe so far. After experiencing the humiliation of being ambushed and having to flee in panic, these Black Fire warriors were all eager to fight. They did not have the slightest fear of entering deep into the Divine Wood tribe's lair. Instead, many people's gazes swept over the two figures at the front from time to time. When they looked at Huoyan, their gazes were filled with respect and trust, but when they looked at Lu Chen, their gazes were complicated with a hint of suspicion. Before they set off, Lu Chen had already asked Huoyan to gather these warriors together, and then he did some of the work that a tribal priest should do. It was just that he, a human, was playing tricks on them, and these Black Fire tribe warriors did not seem to feel any sense of security. At least, they did not feel the strong fighting spirit and power that the fire god was supposed to convey through the priest. This matter made everyone feel a little uneasy, but Lu Chen did not care. After all, he was just fooling around with these ferocious-looking but simple-minded people. He had no choice but to do this after Huoyan strongly urged him to. According to Huoyan, it was fine if there were no priests in the barbarian tribe, but as long as there were priests, they would definitely invite the priests to perform a big ceremony like going to war. Otherwise, the entire tribe would not feel at ease. But one of the consequences of this was that no one seemed to feel the legendary ancestral power. Logically speaking, when the legendary priest was around, shouldn't the ancestral power shine upon everyone? Or could it be that the human priest and the ancestors of the barbarian tribe were not on the same page, so the ancestors of the Black Fire tribe simply ignored this matter? Lu Chen was calm and collected as if nothing had happened. The warriors of the Black Fire tribe looked at each other and did not dare to say anything. After all, that was the messenger of the fire god, the tribal priest. Moreover, the Black Fire tribe had lost their priest for hundreds of years, and no one was particularly clear about the specific situation back then. What if they were wrong? In short, such a group of people came out in such a muddle-headed manner. Although they were a little uneasy, their fighting spirit was still high as they charged towards the old lair of the Divine Wood tribe. They did not know how long they had advanced like this, until the figure of Atsu, who had merged with the darkness, suddenly stopped and let out a few low howls. Only then did the Black Fire tribe's troops suddenly stop. In the distance ahead, a camp appeared under the sky. The houses were faintly discernible, and there were some torches burning in the darkness, emitting light. They should be the warriors of the Divine Wood tribe who were on night watch. Huoyan turned his head to look at Lu Chen, and then waved his hands to both sides. After a moment, all the warriors of the Black Fire tribe behind them quietly spread out, forming a long line, quietly lurking in the night, and then pulled out their respective blades. The night was silent, and the murderous aura condensed like frost, as if it could chill one's heart. Lu Chen, on the other hand, looked at the shadow of the tribe in the distance and took a deep breath. After a moment, a black shadow walked to Lu Chen's side. It was Atsu, who had appeared like a ghost. Its green eyes seemed to have sensed something, and revealed a rare cold and bloodthirsty emotion. Under the black robe, Lu Chen slowly stretched out his arm, and an invisible wave of air suddenly appeared in front of his chest. After a moment, the Vulcan staff appeared in his hand. He held the staff, moved forward, and pointed at the camp of the Divine Wood tribe. At that moment, a wind suddenly blew over the wilderness. The cold wind blew, as if a demon that had been sleeping for many years had finally awakened. In the dark sky, it stared at the creatures below, revealing a ferocious and silent grin. Chapter 3:15. As one of the 5 largest tribes in the north of the wilderness, the Divine Wood tribe actually had a larger population than the Blackfire tribe. Therefore, the scale of their camp was slightly larger than that of the Blackfire tribe. In fact, among the 5 northern tribes, the Mountain Spirit tribe and the Thunder Lizard tribe had the largest population, while the Divine Wood tribe ranked 3rd. As for the Blackfire tribe, they ranked 4th, and there was not much difference between them and the Ghost Fox tribe. However, despite their small population, the Blackfire tribe's combat power had long been considered to be above that of the Divine Wood tribe. It was second only to the Mountain Spirit tribe and the Thunder Lizard tribe. From this, it could be seen that the warriors of the Blackfire tribe were actually quite fierce. It was precisely because of this that the Divine Wood tribe's surprise attack had caught the Blackfire tribe unprepared and made many warriors of the Blackfire tribe feel humiliated. That night, the cold night wind swept across the land of the wilderness, blowing all the way to the camp of the Divine Wood tribe. The burning torches swayed in the wind and danced in a somewhat frenzied manner, emitting flickering afterimages in the darkness like twisting and convulsing snakes. The warriors on night watch were a little tired and shrank their bodies in the cold wind. Even the strong barbarians would feel uncomfortable in the cold night of the wilderness. Until the sound of the wind suddenly grew louder, suddenly turning into a sharp whistling sound in the pitch-black ice-cold night. The warriors guarding the gate of the Divine Wood tribe suddenly raised their heads and looked forward. But before they could react, the shrill, ear-piercing shriek had already cut through the deathly silence of the night and arrived before their eyes. It was as if a light had suddenly lit up in the darkness. It was the sinister grin of a death god, revealing its sharp fangs that glowed with white light. Terrifying sharp blades rushed over, and in the next instant, there was a muffled sound that made one's entire body tremble. A Divine Wood warrior's body was directly sent flying, and on his body, a giant axe had directly chopped into his face. Blood splattered, and the unlucky guy was almost split in half. The warriors of the Divine Wood tribe on both sides turned pale with fright. They immediately roared in anger, but their anger was soon covered by even more vigorous and ferocious shouts. In the darkness of the night, a row of tall and ferocious warriors charged out. Perhaps there weren't that many of them, but in the darkness, they were like raging waves rolling up a violent wave. Amidst the blood-boiling roars in the bone-chilling cold wind, they crashed down. The leader was the most muscular and powerful Huoyan. Like a raging wave, this group of black flame warriors instantly swept over and rushed to the entrance of the Divine Wood tribe. Huoyan laughed sinisterly as he pulled out the giant axe from the corpse. Cries of alarm and screams rose and fell in the surroundings. Blood splashed and a few more corpses appeared on the ground. In the camp of the Divine Wood tribe further away, the alarm had already resounded throughout the entire camp. No matter what, the Divine Wood tribe was a barbarian tribe that lived in the harsh northern wastelands. Those who could survive in such a place were not weaklings. Therefore, in a short period of time visible to the naked eye, torches were quickly lit in the Divine Wood tribe despite being ambushed. Then more and more barbarian warriors swarmed over. Some were holding weapons while others were not even dressed properly. It was obvious that they had just woken up from their sleep. But at a glance, everyone's faces were filled with anger and ferocity. Perhaps there was panic but not much fear. The valiant nature of the barbarians could be said to be completely revealed. It's the people of the Black Flame tribe. An angry roar came from the crowd. It was obvious that someone from the Divine Wood tribe had already recognized the identity of the invading enemy. This roar caused a commotion, but more warriors continued to roar and charge over. Looking at the number of people, the people from the Divine Wood tribe were much more than the warriors from the Blackfire tribe. After all, this was their nest. But from Huoyan onwards, none of the warriors from the Blackfire tribe showed any signs of fear. Instead, they continued to roar and charge forward. Although they had fewer people, they seemed to erupt with an aura that was not any weaker than the opposite side. Seeing that a bloody battle was about to unfold in this harsh and calamitous wasteland, a black figure slowly stepped out from the shadows behind the Blackfire tribe warriors. It was as if he had become one with the darkness. It had been like this since the beginning of time, to the point that the fire god's staff in his hand had even overshadowed his existence. It emitted a strange light in midair, and then the twisted totem carvings slowly lit up. In the darkness, he began to chant a mysterious incantation in a low voice. The ancient aura descended from the night sky, like a god or a devil, staring at the crowd. As if there was a response in the crowd, Huoyan's body suddenly stopped, and then he raised his head towards the sky and roared. His voice was so shrill and loud that no matter if it was friend or foe, everyone was shocked and looked towards him. The tall and sturdy barbarian with the huge axe in his hand suddenly faced upwards and roared. Then, a strange rune suddenly lit up in the middle of his forehead. It flickered with a strange radiance. A moment later, a black flame suddenly rose from the center of the rune with a whoosh. It seemed as if a demon was roaring at the world. Ka 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 ka. A strange sound that caused one's scalp to turn numb rang out from Huoyan's body. Under the madly dancing black flames, the originally ferocious and wild barbarian's entire body suddenly expanded. All of his muscles seemed to have exploded and swelled to more than double their original size. Green veins popped out, making him look like a barbarian giant that no one had ever seen before. His face that had become especially ferocious also looked like a demon at this moment. His eyes flickered with a bloodthirsty light, and the only feeling he had was power. Incomparably powerful power. He roared at the sky as if there was nothing in this world that could stop him. Then he roared and rushed forward. The darkness and the night wind all retreated, revealing the Divine Wood tribe members who had a look of shock on their faces. Witchcraft. A sharp and fearful voice suddenly rang out from the crowd of the Godwood tribe. They were not afraid of blood, sharp blades, or even death. However, it was as if all of them were innately awed by the legendary and mysterious witchcraft. Even their voices trembled as they screamed. On the other hand, the Black Fire tribe was full of fighting spirit. Many warriors even turned around to look. Then they, including the people of the Divine Wood tribe who had also sensed something, saw a scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. A black shadow floated in the air behind them. Darkness gathered from all directions, so dense that it was almost unimaginable, and wrapped around the shadow-like person. A brilliant light flickered in the darkness, and in the center of the light was a staff. The totem rune shone with a dazzling light. Then, in that instant, the entire staff suddenly shot out an indescribably huge black flame. The black flame burned the sky as if it was going to burn the night. At the same time, when the black flame shot out, the warriors of the Black Fire tribe on the ground all trembled, and then they roared in anger. Then, the strange phenomenon that happened to Huoyan also happened to them. Under the night sky, the warriors of the Black Fire tribe all seemed to have turned into ferocious and terrifying demons. Strange totem runes flickered on their foreheads and black flames spewed out of their mouths. Then they sneered and roared as they rushed into the crowd of Divine Wood tribe. Bright red blood seemed to be the main color of the night from the beginning. When the dripping blood spurted out from the body, it was accompanied by terrifying screams and crazed roars filled with killing intent. Not only did the bodies of the Black Fire warriors become larger after being strengthened by the strange Black Fire witchcraft, their strength also skyrocketed. Many of them had clearly not experienced this before, and many of them were not familiar with this feeling, so they were not very proficient in their movements. However, this didn't affect the outcome of the battle at all. Apart from their strength, their bodies were also several times tougher than before under the blessing of the Black Flames. Although the barbarian warriors of the Divine Wood tribe were greatly frightened, they still bravely rushed forward, and fought with the Black Fire warriors that looked like ferocious beasts. But very quickly they discovered that most of their weapons were unable to cause any damage to the Black Fire warriors, while the beastified or demonized Black Fire warriors could easily kill their opponents. Some of the Berserk warriors even threw away their weapons and used their bare hands to tear apart the barbarian warriors that they were fighting. From the beginning of the battle, especially after the Black Fire witchcraft was cast, it suddenly became a one-sided massacre. There were still people in the Divine Wood tribe who were stubbornly resisting, but they were still forced to retreat. But at this moment, someone shouted from the crowd, hold on a little longer. This witchcraft can't last for too long." The warriors of the Divine Wood tribe who were resisting with their lives seemed to have their spirits lifted, as if they had seen a life-saving straw. They resisted with all their might, while the Black Fire warriors that were attacking and slaughtering did not react at all. Perhaps only the strongest and most ferocious of them, Huoyan, looked back after smashing an enemy in front of him to death with a roar. That dark shadow was still floating in the dark night sky, hidden in the darkness. No one could see his face or figure clearly. But amidst that strange and terrifying aura, a dark shadow slowly extended from the sky. Gradually, it swept past like a dark cloud, covering a large part of the Divine Wood tribe's camp. The light gradually dissipated, and a cold gaze looked down from the clouds. In the depths of those eyes, there were dark flames burning fiercely. In the darkness he stretched out his hand and pointed at the crowd below. Thus a cold wind blew and the wind and clouds swirled. Dark demons swept through the sky, whistling down. Chapter 3:16. Fire was the source of light in the world. It was something that illuminated the darkness. It was warmth, hope, and the beginning of all living things. Even when the flame was burning, it was still warm, bright, and scorching. And if one day the flame turned black, no longer bright, no longer warm, and even cold, what would happen? On this day, the barbarians of the Divine Wood tribe in the northern wilderness saw the result. Darkness engulfed the sky and the earth, pressing down heavily. It surrounded the entire tribe's campsite with the aura of a legendary demon. Then, in the mournful whistling of the night wind, in the depths of the endless darkness, in the shadows that seemed to have solidified, there was suddenly something strange twisting and shaking. Then it slowly took shape from the darkness, twisting and stepping out. It was a monster that was completely black. It was neither a ferocious demon beast nor was it a stone puppet. It looked to be several dozen meters tall and could barely be considered a human. However, it had 4 heads and 8 arms. Each face was different, but all of them were ferocious and ferocious, like an evil spirit. Once the strange demon stepped out of the darkness, the entire Divine Wood tribe camp immediately fell into a solemn and deathly silence. Not only did the people of the Divine Wood tribe retreat in fear, even the witchcraft-demonized warriors of the Black Fire tribe were shocked. Only Huoyan, who was in the crowd, suddenly had a flash of ecstasy in his eyes after his body trembled. Compared to the other tribal warriors, he had been raised as the successor of the tribe since he was a child. Naturally, he knew more about the history and matters of the Black Fire tribe. The terrifying monster in front of him was a terrifying monster that was summoned by the incomparably powerful shaman during the most powerful era of the Black Fire tribe thousands of years ago. It was called the Shadow Devil. The nature of the Shadow Devil was actually similar to the stone puppet that the Mountain Spirit tribe shaman had summoned, but in terms of combat power and ferocity, it was far superior to the stone puppet. It was one of the most terrifying creatures summoned by witchcraft in the history of the southern wilderness. Huoyan had never thought that a human like Lu Qin, who seemed to have just received the inheritance of the fire god, and whose cultivation and strength were not too strong, would be able to suddenly summon such a powerful shadow devil. It was no wonder that this human man was so unbelievably confident before the battle began. Thinking of this, Huoyan felt the blood in his body boil, as if in that instant he really saw the hope of reviving his tribe. He fiercely turned around and roared at the enemies in front of him. Waving his giant axe, he charged forward, killing everything in his path. This immediately alerted the surrounding comrades. The warriors of the Black Fire tribe roared out in anger and started killing. Immediately, blood flowed like a river, turning the Divine Wood tribe's camp into a terrifying purgatory. At the same time, when everyone's attention was attracted by the shadow demon, the black shadow in the sky silently descended and landed on the ground outside the Divine Wood tribe's camp. In the darkness, as soon as Lu Chen's feet touched the ground, he suddenly felt his legs go soft. He staggered forward and almost fell to the ground. Fortunately, at this time, a black shadow suddenly sprang out from the darkness. It was the black wolf Atsu who directly used its back to support Lu Chen. The Vulcan staff fell on the yellow ground with a "pah" sound. Lu Chen lay on Atsu's body, his face pale as he gasped for breath. After a while, he seemed to be able to catch his breath and let out a long sigh. Atsu looked back at Lu Chen worriedly and called out in a low voice. Lu Chen forced a smile at it, then sat on the ground. After panting a few more times, he opened his mouth and said, "This damned witchcraft, I don't know where it came from. Even a slightly more powerful witchcraft seems to take my life." Atsu's huge head leaned over and rubbed against Lu Chen's chest, but it didn't seem to know what to do. After a while it lay down beside Lu Chen. Lu Chen looked at the black wolf with a trace of warmth in his eyes. He reached out and gently patted its head, then raised his head to look at the battlefield below. After the terrifying shadow demon joined the battlefield, the Divine Wood tribe's desperate resistance instantly collapsed. Almost no one could resist this terrifying demon, especially when a few of the bravest and strongest Divine Wood tribe warriors rushed forward but were caught by a single palm. Then they were torn apart and killed in front of everyone. All the Divine Wood tribe barbarians seemed to have completely collapsed. No one dared to resist anymore. Everyone was fleeing in fear. The outcome of this battle was completely determined, and it was only a matter of time before it ended. Lu Chen retracted his gaze. Taking advantage of the fact that there was no one around, he casually leaned on Atsu's back and muttered. Then he said in a low voice, "How is this a fire god? It's obviously a death god." The Black Fire Tribe's surprise attack on the Divine Wood Tribe was a complete victory during the night. However, the final battle only ended at daybreak. There weren't many battles in the later stages. Instead, it was more about the Divine Wood Tribe that were almost driven mad by fear. The Shadow Demon disappeared not long after the outcome of the battle was decided. To be honest, this terrifying demon actually didn't kill too many people. However, its terrifying power was unparalleled, and it was a decisive force that influenced the outcome of the battle. At daybreak, the Black Fire Tribe barbarian warriors led by Hou Yen were no longer in a state of enchantment. All of them returned to their normal appearances. But even so, the completely defeated Divine Wood Tribe could no longer put up any resistance. Unlike the sneak attack on the Black Fire Tribe, the Divine Wood Tribe suffered a heavy blow this time. The tribe's camp was in a mess. Blood flowed like a river and corpses and broken limbs could be seen everywhere. Among the survivors, not many managed to escape. In fact, most of the surviving Divine Wood Tribe members were intercepted by the warriors of the Black Fire Tribe. When the first ray of sunlight fell from the sky, the remaining barbarians of the Divine Wood Tribe were gathered in a corner of the camp. Around them were ferocious-looking barbarian warriors of the Black Fire Tribe. Their eyes were ferocious, and the blades and axes in their hands were still wet with blood. A little further away was the Land of Carnage. Who knew how many lives had been lost there? The originally thriving tribe's camp was now in ruins. Houses and walls had collapsed, and many places still had traces of being burnt. The morning breeze carried a strong smell of blood that made people want to vomit. In the sky above the tribe's camp, there were already a few vultures and a large flock of crows circling in the air, cawing as they smelled the blood. It was in such a hellish scene that Lu Qin, who was wearing a black robe with his face hidden in a deep hood, slowly walked into the already fallen tribe's camp with the huge black wolf Atsu by his side. The black robe seemed to block out all the light. Even though it was daytime, no one could see the face of this human male clearly. But Atsu, who stood beside him, attracted everyone's attention. That ferocious beast's appearance was a perfect foil to this terrifying shaman's aura. There was no longer any doubt in the eyes of the warriors of the Black Fire Tribe. Everyone, even the most ferocious and valiant warriors, were filled with reverence in front of this black-robed priest. They respectfully made way for him. Lu Qin silently walked forward, calmly treating all the reverence and fear in the surroundings. Under his feet, he crossed the river of blood. Then he left bloody footprints on the road, all the way to the Divine Wood Tribe's captives. "Priest, it's the priest," terrified, soft voices came from the captives. There were many women, children, and elderly among the captives of the Godwood Tribe, as well as many adult men. Even the patriarch of the Godwood Tribe was not dead yet. He had only lost an arm, and as a form of treatment that was different from the other tribesmen, he was tied with an extra rope and thrown in front of the crowd in a rough manner. At this moment, he stared at the black-robed priest with his eyes wide open. His face was filled with disbelief. But whether it was Lu Qin or the other warriors of the Black Fire Tribe, no one paid attention to him. Hou Yen stood in front of the crowd and watched as Lu Qin walked over. Then he strode forward, stretched out his hands and grasped Lu Qin's arm. Then he nodded heavily. "We won," he said. "We won this battle." Lu Qin raised his head slightly and smiled in the shadow of the black hood. Then he said in a low voice, "Didn't I tell you before? We will win. Let's begin." The black-robed Lu Qin said to Hou Yen. The people standing closest to Hou Yen were his two most trusted warriors. One was Iron Bear and the other was Black Bull. At this moment they turned to look at Hou Yen. They did not seem to understand what Lu Qin meant. But after this battle, even such powerful warriors like them were filled with reverence for Lu Qin. Hou Yen hesitated for a moment and said in a low voice, "I still think it's very difficult. We barbarians would rather die than betray our ancestors." Beside him, Iron Bear and Black Yak were immediately moved. They wore astonished expressions. Lu Qin's had moved slightly, but he didn't seem to mind. He only said casually, "Let's try." "All right." Hou Yen seemed to have finally made up his mind. He turned and walked towards the captives of the Divine Wood Tribe. On the other hand, Lu Qin turned around as if he wasn't interested in what was going to happen next. Instead, after his gaze swept across the bloody and messy battlefield, he suddenly exclaimed in surprise, as if he had discovered something. Then he walked towards the center of the tribe's camp not far away. There was a stone altar that looked like it was used to worship the tribe's ancestors. At this moment, most of it had been destroyed. But in the pile of rubble, where fresh blood had been splattered, Lu Qin's gaze fell on something. It was a white bone mask that looked broken and ancient. At the same time, Huoyan's voice came from behind him. It was steady and loud, echoing in the sky above the tribe. Now you have two choices. Chapter 317. The white bone mask in Lu Chen's hand wasn't the skull of a human. Although the barbarians worshipped their ancestors, it was common for them to preserve the remains of their ancestors and worship them. However, the thing in Lu Chen's hand had two horns, and the shape of its face was completely different from that of a barbarian. It seemed more like an unknown demon beast. Something that could be enshrined on the altar in the middle of a tribe's camp could be considered rather important to a barbarian tribe. However, Lu Chen couldn't tell the origin of this white bone mask. When he held it in his hand, it didn't feel rough at all. Instead, he felt a warm radiance from the tip of his finger. It seemed that after a long period of time, the material of the white bone mask had quietly changed. It was now almost like jade. Even though the shape of the mask was still a little scary, Lu Chen could no longer feel the dense aura of death from it. He played with the white bone mask for a while, then held it in his hand and walked back. At the same time, Huoyan's voice was still echoing, and it quickly caused an uproar among the captives of the Divine Wood tribe. Huoyan explained his intentions very simply to everyone. He gave them two choices. 1. Give up your original worship, throw away everything and join the Black Fire tribe, becoming a part of the Black Fire tribe. The second choice was death. Of course, this was the idea that Lu Chen had proposed to Huoyan, and he had tried his best to convince him to carry it out. However, even though Huoyan trusted Lu Chen, he was still very skeptical of this idea. And it wasn't just Huoyan. Even the barbarian warriors like Iron Bear and Black Bull all shook their heads when they heard of this idea. To a barbarian tribe, there was nothing more important than the gods and ancestors they worshipped. To overthrow all of this and make them submit to a tribe might be even more difficult than killing them. Huoyan and the others did not believe that this method would succeed, but Lu Chen insisted on trying. As for the reason, the others did not know, and probably only Huoyan knew. What Lu Chen wanted was to use the fastest, fiercest, and most direct method to increase the strength of the Black Fire tribe. The biggest problem in front of them was that the population of the Black Fire tribe was too small. If they wanted to return to the peak of their power, they would need to increase their population by at least 10 times. Lu Chen did not have the patience to wait, and Huoyan did not want to wait any longer. However, the reality was the reality. When Huoyan told all the barbarians of the Divine Wood tribe about this, there was a moment of astonishment and silence. Then a loud clamor broke out. It was unknown how many barbarians were cursing and swearing. Their expressions were agitated as if they wanted to rush over and tear this enemy who had slandered their ancestors into pieces. And in front of the crowd, the chief of the Divine Wood tribe roared angrily. With unknown strength, he actually jumped up from the ground as if he wanted to rush over and die with Huoyan. But before he could get close, he was kicked away by the tall and burly Tai Xiong, who was standing next to Huoyan with a sneer. Bang! The chief of the Divine Wood tribe rolled a few times on the ground like a gourd, his face covered in dirt for a moment. Many Divine Wood barbarians in the crowd looked agitated, and jumped up one after another, wanting to fight with their lives on the line. But the warriors of the Black Fire tribe standing at the side immediately suppressed them. Shouts, curses, and sounds of suppression filled the air. In the middle of the crowd, there were people who pulled out their swords and slashed a few times, causing blood to appear. After a while, the group of restless barbarians were finally suppressed. Although Huoyan had already expected this situation, he still felt somewhat embarrassed. The veins on his forehead were throbbing, and he wished he could directly raise his sword and hack a few of them to death. But at this moment, a hand suddenly stretched out from the side and pulled him back. Huoyan turned around and saw the black-robed Lu Chen walking to his side. Don't worry. Lu Chen's voice sounded very calm. Huoyan snorted and said, You have also seen the situation, what should we do now? Lu Chen lightly said, Let me do it. He took a step forward, his eyes sweeping across the crowd in front of him. For a moment, almost everyone's eyes fell on him. Many of the Divine Wood tribe's captives looked at the black-robed priest with eyes full of hatred and fear. After a moment, Lu Chen opened his mouth and said, Drag out all the children and women under the age of 8. As soon as these words came out, there was a sudden silence. After a moment, the Divine Wood tribe was filled with curses, while the warriors of the Black Fire tribe looked at each other in dismay. Many people's eyes uniformly looked at Huoyan, who was standing beside Lu Chen. Lu Chen slightly turned around, also looking at Huoyan. Huoyan hesitated for a moment, then suddenly clenched his teeth and said in a deep voice, Listen to the priest. As soon as he gave the order, dozens of warriors of the Black Fire tribe rushed into the crowd like wolves and tigers, grabbing, pulling, dragging and pulling. The Divine Wood Tribe's crowd was immediately filled with cries and screams. There was no lack of people who fought with their lives on the line, but under the powerful strength of the Black Fire Tribe, the result of this resistance was just a few more corpses on the ground. Then Lu Chen's order was completely carried out. About half of the women and children in the crowd were captured and alone on the other side of the field. These people with the weakest battle strength looked to be shivering with fear on their faces. No one knew what the terrifying black-robed demon was going to do next, but Lu Chen did not let them wait for too long. He quickly made everyone understand his thoughts. These women and children, whether you like it or not, will become a part of the Black Fire Tribe. Lu Chen's cold and calm voice reverberated in the camp. Apart from that, there was no other sound. At this moment, even the air seemed to be filled with a sense of coldness and killing intent. If there are men in the family, let them come and claim them. If no one wants to claim them, then directly distribute them to the Black Fire Warriors today. Let them go back and serve the Black Fire Warriors and give birth to their children. As soon as these words came out, the faces of the Divine Wood Tribe on both sides changed, while the warriors of the Black Fire Tribe were overjoyed. Many of them laughed out loud. In the southern wilderness, due to the harsh living conditions, murder and looting were not uncommon. Women and children who had lost their protection were indeed often robbed. But it could be said that it was the first time in many years that Lu Chen planned to directly divide up such a large group of women after the war. While the Black Fire Tribe warriors were excited, the Divine Wood Tribe naturally looked as if they had lost their parents. Many women and children cried out. However, Lu Chen did not care about this. It seemed that his heart was much colder and harder than these barbarians. Then Lu Chen directly pointed to the Divine Wood Tribe's patriarch who was lying on the ground. His face was covered in blood. He said, "You are the patriarch. Come and identify them first." The Divine Wood Patriarch's body swayed, and he looked like he was about to start cursing again. Lu Chen said coldly, "If you don't come over to claim them, you'll be given to my warriors as slaves." The Divine Wood Tribe's patriarch gnashed his teeth, but in the end he had no choice but to climb up. Then, under the sorrowful and indignant gazes of everyone, he staggered to the front of the group of women and children and began to claim his own women and children. In this wasteland, the primitive barbarians respected strength, and it was extremely common for men to be superior to women. As the patriarch of the tribe, the Divine Wood Tribe's patriarch had actually pointed out 7 women and 2 children. Clearly he had lived a very comfortable life in the past. The Black Fire Tribe's barbarian warriors who were watching with great interest seemed to be filled with jealousy and hatred. A few of them even began to curse, clearly feeling very unbalanced. The Divine Wood Tribe's patriarch knew that the situation was not in his favor, so he did not care. He lowered his head and planned to lead his people back. But at this moment, suddenly, a black figure blocked in front of him. It was that mysterious, terrifying, cold and ruthless black-robed priest. "Wait a moment," Lu Chen said calmly. The Divine Wood Tribe's camp was instantly silent. Everyone looked over at Lu Chen. The original Vulcan staff had already disappeared. At this moment, the only thing in his hand was the white bone mask that he had casually grabbed. His entire body was hidden in the seemingly ancient black robe, which made him look even colder. After a moment, the Divine Wood Tribe's patriarch seemed to have plucked up his courage and asked, "What do you want?" "Our warrior leader has spoken just now," said Yi Zichen. Lu Chen's hood moved slightly, then he looked up at the barbarian in front of him and said, "Join the Black Fire or die. Choose one." The Divine Wood Tribe's patriarch's face twisted, but even if he did not turn his head to look, he knew that all his tribesmen were looking at him. He clenched his teeth and suddenly roared, "Impossible, you must be dreaming." Lu Chen looked at him coldly, his fingers moving slightly, and the white bone mask flipped in his palm, emitting a strange white light. After a moment, Lu Chen suddenly picked up the mask and silently and slowly placed it on his face. At the same time he said lightly, "Okay." The white bone mask slowly descended on the human man's face. Strangely, the mask instantly and firmly attached to his face, without any signs of slipping off. All the clansmen of the Divine Wood Tribe were in an uproar. But very quickly they saw a pair of dark eyes appear behind the terrifying bone mask. 2 black flames burned behind the terrifying eye sockets, like the eyes of a demon, and fell on the Divine Wood Tribe's patriarch. "In that case you can die." The Divine Wood Tribe's patriarch was first shocked, then angry. Just as he was about to resist, his expression suddenly changed. He grabbed his throat with both hands and shouted hoarsely. A ball of black flames suddenly spewed out from his mouth. Then it grew 10 times larger as it faced the wind and directly engulfed his entire body. In an instant, a shrill and miserable howl resounded through the entire camp. Chapter 318. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the black flames engulfed the chief of the Divine Wood tribe. But just like what the black flames had shown in the past, it did not harm the flesh and blood of the human body. Everyone could also see that the chief's body did not suffer any obvious injuries. His flesh and skin were almost completely unharmed in the black flames, as if nothing had happened. However, even though the patriarch of the Divine Wood tribe was unscathed in the black flames, he seemed to have suffered the most terrifying pain in the world. He howled, roared, and cried, throwing the toughness of blood that all barbarians valued the most to the back of his mind. It was as if the pain he was suffering had completely destroyed his will. In the end, he could not even stand. He fell to the ground, rolling and struggling in pain. In his despair, he even began to beg the terrifying black-robed priest for mercy. However, Wuxia just stood there, silent and motionless. The black robe covered his figure and the bone mask covered his face. Everyone could only see his deep, dark eyes and the burning black flames. Just like that, under everyone's shocked and incredulous gazes, the Divine Wood Patriarch slowly died under the condition that his flesh, skin and clothes weren't burned. His body was extremely twisted and there were many wounds on his body. But everyone could clearly see that those wounds had been caused by the chief's own clawing. Just what kind of terrifying pain could make a barbarian fall into such a state of despair? When the final howls gradually faded, the air was filled with a frozen coldness. Almost everyone's eyes were filled with fear, including the warriors of the Black Fire tribe standing at the side. No one would question the identity of the black-robed priest anymore. This terrifying, cruel, vicious, suffocating, and mysterious method was the most revered witchcraft in the southern wilderness for thousands of years. When the black flames dissipated, Wuxia's eyes behind the bone mask once again looked at the twisted corpse on the ground. His pupils seemed to contract slightly, as if he had recalled the painful memories that had haunted him for many years. Next, a cold and calm voice came from behind the bone mask, echoing in the camp. 2 warriors of the Black Fire tribe rushed forward and dragged out a barbarian man from the Divine Wood tribe, throwing him in front of Wuxia. When the barbarian raised his head, he felt a shadow looming over him. The black-robed priest appeared not too far away from him. It was as if the priest had blocked all the light, making the barbarian feel as if the entire world was dark. A hoarse voice came out of the barbarian's mouth. No one could understand what he was saying, or perhaps he didn't say anything at all. However, before he could take another step forward, Wuxia suddenly said, "Wait." Then he turned around and looked at the corpse. He pointed at the woman and child that had been claimed by the dead chief of the Divine Wood tribe and said coldly, "Take these people to the side and distribute them to the warriors of the tribe when we get back." The barbarian warriors of the Black Fire tribe immediately burst into laughter, while the people of the Divine Wood tribe were filled with grief and despair. But this did not change anything. Amidst the cries of the women, they were brought to the other side. Then Wuxia turned around and looked at the barbarian and said, "It's your turn. Go and identify them." The barbarian's body trembled as if he could no longer move. Wuxia said indifferently, "If you recognize them, there's still hope to save them. If you don't, they will definitely be taken away." The barbarian's face was ashen as if he had lost all his life. But in the end, he still went to the group of women and claimed a woman and a child that was still in swaddling clothes. The child seemed to have been born not long ago. It was a small ball wrapped in a piece of animal skin. It was held in the arms of the woman who was also trembling and crying. For some reason, when Wuxia saw the crying tears of the barbarian woman and the child, his heart suddenly palpitated. For a moment he could clearly feel that somewhere in the depths of his heart seemed to soften. After a moment he turned around and looked at the barbarian man. "It's your turn to choose. There are 2 paths, which one will you choose?" The man's gaze stayed on his wife and child. His face was full of pain and struggle. Anyone could see the hesitation on his face, but he did not really give up. Instead, a trace of determination gradually appeared on his face, as if he was about to make a decision. But at this time, Wuxia suddenly said, "You should know that no matter what after today, there will no longer be a Divine Wood tribe in this world." The barbarian man's body trembled, and the other Divine Wood tribe members in the distance were also in an uproar. Wuxia did not care about this at all. He just said indifferently, "Those who are willing to surrender, swear to join the Black Fire tribe and protect your family and children. Those who are not willing to surrender, I will kill them. Without the Divine Wood tribe, Why do you still worship the gods and ancestors? Or are you willing to watch your wife give birth to someone else's child and become a slave for your own child?" As he said this, he pointed at the relatives and children of the Divine Wood tribe's chief. The barbarian man's expression was extremely ugly. The determination on his face disappeared, and his expression changed rapidly. He looked as if he was about to collapse. Suddenly, as if in despair, he roared and shouted at Lu Qin, "Even if I surrender, how can you guarantee that the people of the Blackfire tribe won't come to steal my women?" Lu Qin took a step forward and pointed to the sky without hesitation. He said in a clear voice, "I swear to the fire god worshipped by the Blackfire tribe and to the ancestors that as long as you swear to be loyal to me and join the Blackfire tribe, I will treat you equally. If there is any conflict, I will deal with it fairly. If not, let the heavens send down divine punishment and destroy the Blackfire tribe." This oath was said resolutely and without hesitation. The content of this oath was the most important among the barbarian tribes of the wilderness. It could be said to be impeccable. With Lu Chen's words, the expressions of many people of the Divine Wood tribe changed subtly. But on the other side, on the side of the warriors of the Blackfire tribe, Huo Yan's facial muscles twitched slightly. He stared at the black-robed priest and seemed to grit his teeth. Struggle and hesitation were rare emotions for a barbarian, especially when it involved such a major matter that could overturn the previous half of their lives. Most people would be at a loss. But on this day, when the barbarian man was the first to cry and say that he was willing to surrender to his wife and children, full of shame and despair, the whole camp of the Divine Wood tribe was filled with a cold and dead atmosphere. Even the warriors of the Blackfire tribe had a very ugly expression on their faces. In this wasteland, no one had ever heard of anyone forcing a barbarian to betray his ancestors and beliefs. That kind of pain and despair could be felt by every barbarian, whether it was the barbarians from the Divine Wood tribe or the barbarians from the Blackfire tribe. Their gazes were either filled with hatred, fear, or reverence as they stared at the black-robed priest. The white bone mask made the man look so terrifying and strange. What happened next became numb and cruel. They had to choose between two paths. There was no other possibility, and the price was the barbarians' lives and the fate of their families. The southern wilderness had been a harsh place for survival for a long time. But on this day the barbarians in the camp, whether they were from the Divine Wood tribe or the Blackfire tribe, seemed to have come to a new understanding of this fact. Some people surrendered in despair for their own lives and the fate of their families. They abandoned their ancestors, turned their backs on their gods, and swore an oath to join the Blackfire tribe. There were also some Divine Wood barbarians who were unyielding and would rather die than surrender. What awaited them was the purgatory of the Blackfire tribe, and the scene of their women and children being carved up as slaves in front of everyone. Scene after scene, cold, cruel, and suffocating, played out until the end. In the evening of that day, the warriors of the Blackfire tribe left with a large group of people and set foot on the road back to the city. Many people in the crowd carried big and small bags on their backs, their faces filled with sorrow and pain. Behind them, a fire slowly rose to the sky. The once prosperous Divine Wood tribe camp was engulfed in flames, and the name of the Divine Wood tribe after this night forever disappeared in the night of the southern wilderness. In front of the night, there were stars, dark clouds, and even more deep and boundless darkness, shrouding the vast land of the wilderness. Chapter 319. Thousands of years had passed in the southern wilderness. Countless tribes rose and fell and countless people lived and died. The only thing that never changed was the desolate land and the endless wind and sand. Too much time had passed and one's vision was too far away. It would make people numb. The tribes that had perished and the people that had died would no longer have the power to move people. They would be submerged in the long river of time, buried in the dust of history and easily forgotten by most people. Even if some people remembered them or saw bits and pieces of them from some ancient books, they would just turn the page with an indifferent face. Huo Yan was the most outstanding barbarian in the Blackfire tribe for many years. Not only did he have a strong body and fierce fighting power, but he also had vision and decisiveness that almost no one else in the tribe had. Perhaps it was because of this that he had never been willing to be ordinary. He did not want to be suppressed in the harsh and barren north of the wilderness, and spent his life fighting with the other 4 tribes. He knew and remembered the glory of the ancient ancestors of the Blackfire tribe. Ever since he was a child, his biggest dream was to restore his tribe to its former glory. At the same time, he would engrave his name in the history of the tribe as the hero of the revival of the tribe. He would be remembered, praised, and spread by thousands of generations of descendants. It It was also for the same reason that he had never thought that he would become a stepping stone, that he would silently dedicate his life to benefit his descendants, and that he would accumulate his strength. The success he wanted was right now, right in this life. Unfortunately, Huoyan himself did not possess that kind of powerful power. That was the most powerful and supreme power in the southern wilderness, witchcraft. Therefore, when he suddenly saw the black fire on Lu Chen's body that day, this barbarian resolutely and inconceivably made the biggest gamble of his life in that short period of time. He desperately dragged a human man onto the pirate ship of the Black Fire tribe, and then pinned the hope of the tribe's revival on him. For this, he piously prayed to the god of fire. Just like in the past, the god of fire remained silent and did not respond. For thousands of years, the privilege of communicating with the god of fire only belonged to shamans and priests who had the power of witchcraft. Huoyan did not know what the god of fire thought of his decision, but he could see that the Black Fire tribe had destroyed the Divine Wood tribe, which used to be on an equal footing with them, in one night. This was a glorious victory that the Black Fire tribe had never had in hundreds of years. This was an unimaginable eruption of the Black Fire tribe after years of decline. Perhaps this was the sign of the Black Fire tribe's rise again. Unlike the Divine Wood tribesmen who were at a loss about their future and had just experienced the extermination of their tribe, every warrior of the Black Fire tribe was extremely excited. As their leader, Huoyan undoubtedly understood the importance of this battle. He could even imagine how the entire northern region of the wilderness would be shaken when the news that the Divine Wood tribe had been annihilated by the Black Fire tribe spread within a few days. The impact of this battle was even greater than the battle between the four races and the Mountain Spirit clan. In the darkness of the night, under the illumination of the torches, the troop moved forward. Except for Huoyan and the huge black wolf Atsu, no one dared to approach the black-robed priest, whether it was the captives who had surrendered in fear or the warriors of the Black Fire tribe. "You've done well." Because there was no one around, it was easier for the two to talk. Huoyan lowered his voice and said to Lu Chen. The hood on Lu Chen's head moved, and he turned his head to look at Huoyan. In the light of the fire, his figure seemed like an illusory shadow, and the white bone mask covering his face made him look even more sinister and terrifying. Huoyan frowned and said, "I don't like you wearing this mask. It's not something of our tribe." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, and then reached out to take off the white bone mask. When his human face, which was out of place among the people around him, reappeared in front of Huoyan, for some reason, Huoyan seemed to be relieved. "That's good," he said. "Are you satisfied with the result of this battle?" Lu Chen asked him. Huoyan smiled and nodded, saying, "I can't think of a better result." As he said this, his expression became serious and he looked at the people behind him, saying in a low voice, "It's only these people that I'm still a little worried about." Lu Chen said lightly, "I've already told you the reason why I'm doing this. This is something that can't be helped. Your tribe has been in decline for too long and your strength is too weak. If you want to compete with the large tribes in the south, you can only take an unconventional approach if you want to see results in a short period of time." Huoyan was silent, but there was still a trace of worry on his face. He said, "Are you really confident?" Lu Chen looked at the darkness in front of him and after a while he said, "We'll subdue as many as we can. As for those that we can't subdue or those that refuse to sincerely submit, I'll let you handle them." Huoyan nodded, his face cold and with a trace of murderous intent. He didn't say anything else. As a barbarian and the leader of the tribe, he was used to seeing blood, killing, and death. He naturally wouldn't be soft-hearted. "That's right, how did you summon that shadow demon?" After a while, Huoyan asked Lu Chen again, a trace of surprise and faint excitement on his face. "I've heard of this thing when I was young, it's one of the most powerful monsters." Lu Chen hesitated for a while, then said, "It's the Fire God Staff's credit." "Fire God Staff?" Huoyan didn't understand and asked, "What about the Fire God Staff?" Lu Chen said, "After it returned to its original state in the Fire God altar, you might not have felt it, but I could feel that after the Fire God Staff merged into one, its spiritual power greatly increased, and it also has an unimaginable power. When using the Fire God's witchcraft, it seems to have the effect of amplifying the power by 10 times. What? Even though Huoyan was already used to being surprised these days, at this moment, he still couldn't help but be shocked. Lu Chen seemed to have already expected such a reaction from Huoyan. He smiled bitterly and said, "That's right. You also know that it hasn't been long since I came into contact with the Fire God's inheritance. There are many witchcraft that I can't use, but with the help of the Fire God Staff, it's much more convenient." This is also the biggest reason why I dared to boast to you that we can definitely win against the Divine Wood tribe." Huoyan let out a long breath, nodded and said, "I see." Then he revealed a happy expression and said, "If that's the case, as long as you diligently train, your cultivation will increase, and with this god's staff won't even the shaman?" He didn't dare to continue, but the meaning in his words was very clear. However, Luqian shook his head and said, "I feel that this matter isn't as good as you think." Huoyan was stunned and said, "Why?" Luqian said, "I vaguely feel that this kind of powerful effect probably has an upper limit. Once the power of the Black Fire God reaches a certain level, the Fire God staff will no longer have such a powerful help. Otherwise, how many powerful shamans and priests did your Black Fire tribe produce in the past? With just this Fire God staff, you would be able to flatten the southern wilderness and unify all the races in the north." Huoyan slowly nodded, looking a little disappointed, but he still smiled and said, "You are right. But after so long, there's something I can't figure out." Luqian said, "What's wrong?" Luqian looked at him and said, "Since the Fire God staff is so powerful, why did the ancestors of your Black Fire tribe split it into two and only brought one half to the north?" He smiled and casually said, "It can't be that the shamans or priests of your Black Fire tribe in that era, when countless barbarian armies attacked the north, secretly decided that they would lose this battle, so they secretly left the Fire God staff behind and left a spark for your Black Fire tribe, right?" Huoyan was stunned at first, then laughed and said, "How is that possible?" Luqian also laughed and said, "That's right, it's impossible. That's why I can't figure it out." Huoyan shrugged his shoulders and said, "Then don't think about it. Look in front of us. After walking for a while, we should be able to see our tribe's campsite. Father and the rest should be anxiously waiting for us." Luqian slightly narrowed his eyes and said, "Let's go back and take a look. I don't know what they will think when they see the Divine Wood tribe people." Huoyan's face stiffened and he didn't say anything. Chapter 320. When Huoyan returned to the Black Fire tribe's camp with this unprecedented victory, the anxious tribesmen who had been waiting for a long time immediately cheered. The entire Black Fire tribe seemed to be boiling with excitement. After returning to the camp from the secret cave in the oasis, they were most worried about their loved ones who had left for the war. Even if the barbarians were savage, fierce and wild, they still had kinship and humanity. For example, among the Divine Wood tribe's people who had surrendered, there were many barbarian warriors who would rather die than surrender. However, under the premise of the tribe's destruction, and when Luqian coldly threatened them with the fate of their families, they finally surrendered. Of course, it was also possible that some of them already had the desire to live in their hearts, but they had no excuse in front of the gods and ancestors. Luqian just happened to present this almost perfect excuse in front of them, allowing them to live with some humiliation but peace of mind. As for the truth of the matter, no one knew what everyone was thinking. Only they themselves would know. The news of the Black Fire tribe's warriors annihilating the Divine Wood tribe in one fell swoop spread throughout the Black Fire tribe's camp. Great joy immediately enveloped the entire tribe. However, when people saw the Divine Wood tribe's captives following behind the Black Fire tribe's warriors, they were all taken aback. When they heard that under the leadership of the black-robed priest, these Divine Wood tribe barbarians were about to become a part of the Black Fire tribe, the entire camp suddenly burst into an uproar. The Divine Wood tribe, which had been exterminated, was naturally uncomfortable with swallowing so many people from other tribes at once. However, for the Black Fire tribe, which was the victor, it was an unprecedented event. For many years, the barbarians of the southern wilderness had already become familiar with and accustomed to the original rules. In their minds, worshipping the gods and revering their ancestors was a matter of course. No one would ever think of betraying these rules and joining another tribe. Of course, those who had such thoughts now seemed to have not encountered the desperate situation that the Divine Wood tribe had encountered. But no matter what, most of the Black Fire tribe's barbarians couldn't accept this. However, no one in the camp dared to rebuke them. The reason was very simple. Apart from the mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest, the leader of this operation was the extremely prestigious warrior chief, Huoyan. Moreover, many of the Black Fire barbarians quickly discovered that the strongest and most elite warriors who had followed Huoyan on this expedition, the barbarians who could be said to be the foundation of the Black Fire tribe's military strength, did not seem to have any objections. Not only that, when that strange atmosphere spread, almost all the Black Fire warriors stood behind Huoyan and the black-robed priest, intentionally or unintentionally. That's right, apart from Huoyan there was also the black-robed priest. Every single black fire warrior looked at that black figure with awe that they had never felt before. However, rules that had been ingrained in the hearts of the people for thousands of years could not be easily overturned. Ordinary black fire tribesmen were intimidated by these powerful people, but in the black fire tribe, there were people of higher status who were not afraid of them. That person quickly walked out and stood in front of all the black fire tribesmen. The wrinkles brought by Nian Hua's old age were engraved on Huahu's face. His back was hunched and he was gasping for breath. Even his steps were slow. Perhaps only his eyes still maintained the firm belief of a barbarian tribe leader. His grandson Huahu supported him by his side. Then he looked at the captives who had been brought to his tribe's camp with a complicated and slightly angry expression. In the end, he turned all his disgust into hatred and glared at the person standing beside his father. Lu Qin of course noticed the gaze of the barbarian youth Huahu. Lu Qin only felt that it was a little funny to see that strange but hateful gaze. He could more or less understand the feelings of this barbarian youth called Huahu, but he was not apologetic at all. A long time ago when he was just a youth about the same age as Huahu, under the tutelage of that bald and burly deity stage cultivator, he had already cast aside his weak and compassionate heart. Perhaps after many years his experience had enriched, and his temperament had also changed, but that was only for friends he had met by chance in the human race. As for the southern wilderness, he still did not have the slightest bit of soft-heartedness. Therefore he turned a blind eye to Huahu's angry gaze, and even took out the white bone mask from his bosom in a slightly provocative manner, and slowly put it on his face. After entering the Black Fire tribe's camp, the former Divine Wood tribesmen who had betrayed their ancestors and were forced to join the enemy tribe, seemed very frightened. Looking at the strange and hostile gazes around them, the panic and bewilderment that had been suppressed in their hearts seemed to be on the verge of exploding. Who would believe the barbarians who had betrayed the beliefs of their ancestors? If it were him he would not believe it either. So what would be waiting for him? The unpredictability and fear of death could drive a person insane. Therefore the women tightly hugged their crying children with tears in their eyes, while the men clenched their fists and gritted their teeth. The clamorous noise drifted out from the crowd, increasing the vigilance and hostility of the surrounding Black Fire tribe clansmen. The atmosphere in the camp gradually became tense. It was also at this time that Lu Qin put on the white bone mask. Under the sunlight, Lu Qin looked like the shadow of a demon at this moment, contrasting with the gloomy white bone mask, making him look even more terrifying. But for some reason, when the white bone mask appeared on his face, perhaps because they suddenly saw a token passed down by their ancient ancestors, or perhaps because they remembered the promise made by the black-robed priest, the restless Divine Wood tribesmen slowly calmed down. So in the end, everyone's eyes once again fell on the center of the camp. There Huaying supported his grandfather Huahu, and opposite them stood Huayan and Lu Qin side by side. The three generations of the Black Fire tribe were the symbols and leaders of the Black Fire tribe. With the addition of a black shadow beside them at this moment, there seemed to be a faint confrontation. The barbarians of the Black Fire tribe looked at this scene with complicated expressions, and Huayan's expression did not look good either. After a moment, he stepped forward and bowed to his father, saying, "Father, I've returned." Huahu nodded his head and looked at him with a complicated expression, then swept his gaze over Lu Qin who was standing beside him. After a moment of silence he asked, "What's going on?" Huayan had no intention of hiding anything. He raised his head and in front of everyone he clearly explained the ins and outs of the matter. Finally, he looked at Huahu with bright eyes and said, "Father, from today onwards, these people are the people of our Black Fire tribe." The surrounding Black Fire tribe members were deathly silent. No one spoke and no one even dared to breathe loudly. Even Huaying, who was standing beside Huahu, had a change in expression. He looked at his father, who was once the most imposing and upright person in his heart, with his mouth half open as if he did not know what to say. After a while, Huahu suddenly sneered and said, "Nonsense." After these two words were said, it immediately caused a commotion in the surrounding crowd. This was the judgment of the current chief of the Black Fire tribe, and he directly denied what Huayan had just said. His attitude and expression were exceptionally clear, leaving no room for refutation. "This is nonsense, this is nonsense." Huahu raised his voice and shouted, "If you are not a descendant of our Black Fire tribe, then you have no right to become a barbarian of the Black Fire tribe. What right do you have to act so recklessly and take in so many people of different races at once? Are you not afraid of the wrath of the fire god and the punishment of the ancestors?" Following his harsh words, the other people of the Black Fire tribe seemed to be wavering, and their expressions became somewhat hesitant. The Divine Wood tribe members were once again frightened and panicked, and the scene immediately became somewhat chaotic. Whispers could be heard as if something was about to happen. But at this moment, a voice suddenly came from the side, suppressing all the noise. Right? Who has the right to judge whether the fire god is angry or not? And who has the right to listen to the thoughts of the Black Fire tribe's ancestors? Is it you? In an instant, all the voices in the Black Fire tribe disappeared, and countless gazes fell on the source of the voice. They saw the black-robed priest wearing a white bone mask take a step forward, staring at the old chief and lightly say, "If I remember correctly, the only ones who have the right to judge these matters should be the chief priests of our tribe." Chapter 321. It was so quiet in the Black Fire tribe's camp that one could hear a pin drop. Everyone's faces were cold and stunned. The only difference was that most of the Black Fire clan members were shocked and worried, while many of the Divine Wood clan members who had been exterminated and captured had expressions of joy on their faces. Even though the terrifying black-robed priest was the biggest culprit behind the destruction of the Divine Wood tribe, and even though they still hated this black-robed man not long ago, in this sudden internal strife of the Black Fire tribe, many of these captives who were in an awkward situation and could not even control their own lives secretly sided with Lu Qin. Humans were complicated and strange. Perhaps it was because Lu Qin was the only person in this hateful Black Fire tribe who had promised to let them live, or perhaps it was simply because Lu Qin once wore the white bone mask passed down by the Divine Wood tribe's ancestors that they subconsciously felt a sense of familiarity with him. But no matter what, no one here cared about the thoughts of these captives at this moment. After Lu Qin bluntly said such straightforward words that almost hit the nail on the head, the atmosphere instantly became so cold that it was almost on the verge of exploding. The old chief of the Black Fire tribe looked as if his entire face was twisted. Perhaps for many years, no one had dared to speak to him like this, and no one had dared to challenge his authority in such a straightforward manner. Even Huoyin, who was the successor of the next generation that he had groomed, had always treated him with great respect even when he had some disagreements with him. He had never been so bold before. However, all of this wasn't important at all. Even though these so-called offenses, anger, and so on made the aged fire tiger furious, under his twisted and furious expression, his heart was slowly turning cold and sinking. Because what the human male, the black-robed priest, had said was correct. As the chief of the tribe, Fire Tiger could not be more clear about the correctness of Lu Qin's words. Yes, every word he said was correct. Those were the rules of the Black Fire tribe that had been passed down from ancient times to the present, from countless generations of their ancestors. The priest was the soul of the Black Fire tribe, not the patriarch. Even though the Black Fire tribe had been declining for many years and had not had a priest for at least hundreds of years, rules were rules. The rules left by the gods and ancestors had never been changed. You. How dare you speak to me like that? After a long while, Fire Tiger seemed to have awoken from his huge shock. His face was filled with anger as he looked at Lu Qin and roared. Lu Qin continued to stare at the elderly clan leader. He saw the changes in his expression and the flicker in his eyes. At this moment he laughed coldly in his heart. Just as he was about to speak again, a tall figure suddenly blocked his way. That was Fire Rock. As expected, in the end were these two still father and son? Lu Qin narrowed his eyes and stared at Huoyan's back. Huoyan stood motionless, but for some reason his back seemed to tremble slightly. Perhaps it was because he felt a little cold. However, his face was still looking forward, looking at his father and son who were in a state of rage. Perhaps Fire Tiger could still barely control his emotions, but it seemed as if the young Fire Hawk could no longer endure it. His eyes had already turned red, and a beast-like roar came from his throat. It seemed as if Lu Qin's provocation towards Fire Tiger had completely infuriated him. Thus, even with Huoyan standing between them, Fire Hawk was still unable to endure it. Huoyan noticed Fire Hawk's appearance and frowned. Just as he was about to stop him, Fire Hawk suddenly roared and pulled out a blade from his waist. Then, like all the warriors of the Black Fire tribe, he roared and rushed forward, swinging his blade at Lu Qin. At the same time he shouted, "Bold bastard, how dare you speak to your grandfather like that? I'll cut you to death." The blade cut through the sky, bringing with it a trace of coldness. The entire situation seemed to be about to escalate at this moment. Lu Qin sneered, the Black Fire tribesmen were shocked, and Fire Tiger reached out to pull him back but was unable to. All the warriors of the Black Fire tribe, without exception, stood in place without moving. No one stopped Fire Hawk, but no one rushed out to help him either. For a moment, Fire Tiger seemed to have sensed something. His gaze swept across the surroundings, and his expression became more and more unsightly. Huoyan snorted coldly and frowned. His body moved slightly, looking like he wanted to go forward and stop his son. However, at this moment, everyone in the camp suddenly heard the shrill howl of a wolf. A black shadow suddenly scuttled out from Lu Chen's side like a bolt of lightning, instantly pouncing on the fire hawk who had just drawn his blade and charged over with lightning speed, instantly pinning him to the ground. That was Black Wolf Atsu. The huge wolf body seemed to directly crush the youth's resistance, and Atsu easily pushed him to the ground. Then, with a roar, it opened its bloody mouth with sharp fangs and directly bit down on Firehawk's throat. Everyone's expression changed. No matter what, Firehawk was still the grandson of Chief Hua Hu and the only son of the next chief, Huoyan. For a moment, only a series of whooshing sounds could be heard. Finally, 7 or 8 figures rushed out and pounced on Atsu. But it looked like it was too late. In the blink of an eye, those huge fangs had already bitten Firehawk's neck. At this moment, Huoyan suddenly turned around and shouted at Lu Chen, "Stop! Stop!" Almost at the same time, Lu Chen also shouted to stop Atsu. Atsu's movement stopped at this critical moment, but its sharp fangs did not leave Firehawk, whose face had already turned as pale as paper. It pounced on Firehawk's body, and then glanced at Lu Chen from the corner of its eye. Lu Chen ignored it. He did not speak, nor did he make any movements. He only looked indifferently at the burly barbarian in front of him. After a moment he said, "What do you want to do?" Huoyan gritted his teeth. After a moment he said in a low voice, word by word, "He is my son." Lu Chen did not speak and only quietly looked at him. Huoyan's gaze also met his without flinching. Just like this, after an unknown amount of time, Lu Chen slowly nodded, then took a step forward and walked past Huoyan. When he reached Huoyan's side, he waved his hand. Atsu growled and finally let go of the barbarian youth. It trotted all the way back to Huoyan's side. At the same time, Lu Chen used a voice that only Huoyan could hear and said, "He is your son, but he just attacked a tribal priest. Do you still remember the consequences of this kind of reckless behavior a few hundred years ago?" Huoyan silently stood where he was. His expression was abnormally ugly, but he did not say anything. He only watched as Lu Chen walked away. The conflict within the Black Fire tribe suddenly stopped, and then the entire tribe camp seemed to have regained its peaceful and joyful atmosphere. However, whether it was the Black Fire tribe members or the large number of Divine Wood captives, they could all feel the faint undercurrent under the calm surface. Everyone dispersed, and then there were people who came forward to settle down the Divine Wood captives. Although someone had previously promised to let them join the Black Fire tribe, it was obviously not a good time to bring this up. After the sky turned dark in the northeast corner of the camp, in a stone house that had been specially cleared out, Atu the Black Wolf laid at the door, while Lu Chen leaned against the window, looking at the moon that had just risen in the night sky. Apart from the two of them, there was another person in the house. It was Huoyan. He was sitting not far from Lu Chen, looking somewhat silent. Lu Chen retracted his gaze from the slowly rising moon and looked at Huoyan, saying, "What are you thinking about?" Huoyan was silent for a moment, then said, "Why did you deliberately do that in front of the entire tribe?" Lu Chen lightly said, "According to the rules of your tribe, I am now a priest. What do you think a tribal priest would have done in that kind of situation?" Huoyan did not speak. Lu Chen sneered, saying, "If it was any other priest or shaman in the history of the Black Fire tribe, if they met someone who dared to offend them like today, then your son would already be a dead man." He waved his hand, saying calmly, "You know, I was lenient because of you." Huoyan said with some difficulty, "You have to give them a little more time so that they can accept these things now." "What you and I lack the most is time," Lu Chen said bluntly. "I did what I did because I had no other choice." Huoyan said, "But if you continue to be so strong with such powerful witchcraft, sooner or later, your prestige in the tribe will even surpass mine." Lu Chen stared at him and after a moment said, "You are starting to worry about me?" Huoyan was silent for a long time, then slowly nodded, saying, "Yes. I never thought that in the cultivation of the Black Fire spiritual power, you would advance so much in such a short time." He looked up at Lu Chen, saying, "With your intelligence and the Black Fire witchcraft, I think it won't be long before the Black Fire tribe is completely under your control. Am I right?" He looked at Lu Chen, saying word by word. Chapter 322. The room was very quiet. Neither Lu Chen nor Huoyan spoke for a long time. Atsu's huge body completely blocked the door. It didn't look like a monster but more like an overfed dog. It glanced at the people in the room tiredly and yawned. It seemed to be bored and slowly narrowed its eyes. Do you know what you're saying? Lu Chen looked at Hui Yan and said calmly, you're actually worried that a human will steal the entire Black Fire tribe? Hui Yan shook his head and said, you're not a normal human. You're now the messenger of the fire god, the priest of our Black Fire tribe. For thousands of years, we barbarians have long been used to obeying the orders of shamans and priests. As long as you truly gain the respect of the entire tribe, then they will definitely listen to your orders and from then on, obtain supreme power. Then what do I want this power for? Lu Chen suddenly interrupted him and asked Hui Yan. Hui Yan was silent. Lu Chen laughed coldly and said, don't forget from beginning to end, it was you who dragged me into this. I have no interest in your barbarian games or things like reviving glory. How about this? If you're really worried, then tell me how to return to the north. I'll immediately leave this place and let your Black Fire tribe sleep peacefully. How about that? Hui Yan thought for a while, then looked very seriously at Lu Chen and said, you can't leave. Lu Chen rolled his eyes and said unhappily, if I didn't know that you're a fanatic believer of the fire god, then no matter how I force you, it'll be useless. Otherwise, I would really want to cast a black fire curse on you and let you have a taste of that. Although Hui Yan was brave, he couldn't help but frown when he heard those words. He looked at Lu Chen with a complicated expression and said after a moment of hesitation, speaking of which, didn't you make a promise to the Divine Wood tribe that you would personally guarantee their fate? Why do you want to leave this place so soon? Have you ever thought that after you leave, won't they all fall into a miserable fate after being abandoned by you? In this way, isn't it breaking your oath? What's there to be afraid of? When I swore that day, I only talked about the Black Fire tribe, not myself, Lu Chen replied calmly. Hui Yan was momentarily speechless. After which, he looked at Lu Chen's expression and bitterly laughed for a moment. However, he shook his head and said, forget it, let's not talk about this. There's something I need to discuss with you. Lu Chen said, what is it? Speak. Hui Yan said, you are now an official priest of our Black Fire tribe. Please don't say that. Lu Chen waved his hand and said, your father, the current chief of the Black Fire tribe, hasn't acknowledged me yet. My position isn't stable. Who knows, I might be removed in 2 or 3 days. Hui Yan sighed and said, my father still can't understand our thoughts and methods for now. But don't worry, as long as I'm here, he will always stand on your side. Moreover, I don't believe that you can't see that after the battle at the Divine Wood camp, the strongest and most elite warriors of our tribe have already accepted you. They are especially respectful towards you. Lu Chen laughed and said, that's because they received more women and servants after the battle, right? That's also because your witchcraft is so powerful. We, the barbarians of the southern wilderness, are born to respect the strong. Lu Chen smiled and didn't say anything. Hui Yan continued, as for my father, you don't have to worry about him. I will often go over to discuss these matters with him. No matter what, it is the will of the fire god to cooperate with you. I have no doubt about this. No matter what, I will carry this matter to the end. Lu Chen looked deeply at him, a strange light seemed to flash in the depths of his eyes. Hui Yan paused for a moment, then said to Lu Chen, let's not talk about these troublesome matters first. But I have discovered that you seem to be missing one person. Lu Chen was startled and said, missing who? Hui Yan said, missing someone to serve you. You are now a priest of the tribe. Your identity and status are different from others. You should find someone to help you with the daily chores of cleaning the house and preparing meals. No need, it's too troublesome. Lu Chen immediately shook his head and wanted to decline. But Hui Yan's expression was resolute. He stood up and walked out. At the same time he said, leave this matter to me. I will help you find a satisfactory and hardworking person. You don't have to worry about this. How could Lu Chen not care? He spent his days alone with the Atsu. He wasn't afraid of any secret matters being leaked. If there was suddenly a barbarian by his side, wouldn't his hands and feet be tied? But Hui Yan seemed to be an impatient person. After saying those words, he strode out of the house. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared. Lu Chen chased to the door. When he looked outside, he could no longer see Hui Yan's back. Lu Chen looked up at the sky. After a moment, he spat out a mouthful of impure air. He smiled bitterly and said, forget it, let's leave it be. Hui Yan fulfilled his promise the next morning. He brought the person he wanted to the door of the stone house that Lu Chen lived in. Last night, the mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest didn't seem to do anything strange. He just sat quietly under the wall of the house. His big black wolf was still loyally lying on the ground in front of the door, watching the people coming and going in the camp. For thousands of years, Lu Qin was the first human to come to the southern wilderness. So Hui Yan certainly couldn't find another human to serve him. So, the person that Hui Yan brought over this morning was a barbarian. It was a female barbarian. She looked to be about 18 or 19 years old. She was still very young, but her expression seemed to be full of grief. When she looked at Lu Qin, her gaze seemed to be very complicated. It seemed that she was thinking about how to avenge the deaths of her clansmen. How to secretly get rid of this incomparably cruel black-robed priest. Lu Qin stared at the woman for a while. Then he turned around and walked to Hui Yan's side. He glared at him and sneered, "Are you afraid that I won't die fast enough?" Hui Yan heard this and said, "How could there be such a thing?" Lu Qin pointed at the young body that was kneeling on the ground and sneered, "This woman is clearly a young woman that no one in the divine Wood tribe has claimed. Why did you send her to me? What do you want? Let her serve you." Hui Yan laughed loudly. Then he waved his hand and turned around to leave. Lu Qin was somewhat helpless. He was about to say something when he turned around and looked at the young barbarian. He sighed and asked, "What is your name?" "My name is Yi." Chapter 323. Yezi was a barbarian girl. Because she was young, her skin looked better than most of the barbarians in the wilderness. However, there were still obvious characteristics of the barbarians on her body. For example, there were sharp fangs protruding from the corners of her mouth, tattoos on her body, and she was actually quite tall. When Lu Qin called her up, he found that this barbarian girl was almost as tall as him. In fact, from the aesthetic point of view of the human race, most people would not be able to accept barbarian women. However, it was probably because of her young age. In general, this woman named Yezi seemed to be more pleasing to the eye than the ferocious barbarians outside. Compared to those barbarians who like to have their faces covered with twisted patterns and talisman tattoos, Yezi's exposed skin only had 2 tattoos on her upper left arm and right thigh. This was also the reason why she looked more delicate. However, having been in the Black Fire tribe for so long, Lu Qin roughly knew some of the barbarians' customs. It was not that Yezi did not want to have those colorful tattoos on her face, but because those tattoos on the face often meant boasting, meritorious deeds, achievements, or other qualifications. It was not something that could be casually tattooed on. It was probably because this barbarian girl was too young and not qualified enough. While Lu Qin was sizing up the barbarian girl, Yezi was also secretly looking at him. The women of the tribe were still more gentle than the aggressive male warriors. In her eyes there was a bit of awe and curiosity, but it seemed to be mixed with a bit of resentment. Lu Qin quickly noticed this. He did not have any intention of guessing, but directly asked Yezi about her origin and identity. Yezi lowered her head and said, just as Lu Qin had guessed, Yezi was a member of the Divine Wood tribe who had surrendered after their tribe was exterminated. Would he let a woman who had a grudge against him, and who might even have relatives who died in the war started by Lu Qin by his side? Hui Yan's burly and brave figure flashed in front of Lu Qin's eyes. He thought to himself, what is this guy whose mind is far more detailed and profound than the other barbarians thinking? Did he have some ulterior motive, or was it simply because it was convenient? Currently, the atmosphere within the Black Fire tribe was rather delicate. Patriarch Huahu was clearly dissatisfied with Huayan and Lu Qin's actions. Despite Huahu's advanced age, many of the tribe's warriors stood on the side of Huayan and Lu Qin. However, he had been the chief of the tribe for many years after all. He was a person of virtue and prestige and no one could ignore him. Not to mention that Huahu was Huayan's father after all. They were related by blood, so ordinary people could not do anything to him. Even in the barbarian tribes, which were known for their ferocity and savagery, it was not popular for the sons to go against their elders, or for the sons to fall out with their fathers and even fight with them. Under such circumstances, it might not be convenient for Huayan to directly call for a tribesman from the Black Fire tribe to serve Lu Qin. Instead, he would not need to be courteous with the Divine Tree captives, and would be able to account to the Black Fire tribe. As for what Lu Qin had said before about giving these people equal treatment, let's just wait and see. Probably not many people would take it seriously. Lu Qin pondered in silence while Yi just stood there. She did not dare to move until she received the orders of this mysterious and terrifying priest. Just like that, after an unknown period of time, Lu Qin suddenly withdrew his gaze and looked at her again. Come here, he said calmly, but his tone seemed to have an unquestionable aura. Yi lowered her head and responded, slowly walking in front of him. Like most of the barbarians, Ye's clothes were mainly animal skins, supplemented by small stones of various shapes and colors, animal teeth and small bones as ornaments. The harsh sandstorm on the wilderness did not seem to have damaged the beauty and youth of this barbarian girl. The exposed skin on her arms and thighs was still fair. But not far in front of her, the man stood in front of her like a mass of darkness. One black and one white, the shadow and the light, juxtaposed in such a somewhat dazzling way in the stone house. But at least at this moment, Ye's whiteness looked particularly small and fragile. In front of the threatening dark aura, or because of the awe she had for the shaman and the priest since she was a child, even if she still held a trace of resentment in her heart, Ye could not help but kneel down. She was just an ordinary barbarian girl. She did not have the powerful force of the barbarian warriors. She was weak and ordinary. Not to mention that even the barbarian warriors, who were known for their ferocity and toughness, were in awe of this shadow-like man. After a moment, Ye suddenly felt a chill on the top of her head. It was a hand that was gently placed on the top of her head. Why was the palm so cold, almost not like the flesh and blood of a human? At that moment Ye even trembled for no reason. She closed her eyes and was very afraid. She even felt that it was not a hand that was pressing on her head, but a piece of gloomy white bone. "Do you hate me in your heart?" That calm, seemingly emotionless voice sounded in Ye's ears. Ye was stunned for a moment, and then immediately shook her head desperately. She was afraid that if she moved a little slower, this terrible and evil priest might make her suffer the most terrible punishment in the legends. Lu Qin looked at the terrified barbarian girl and wanted to say something, but after a moment he secretly sighed in his heart. He thought to himself, what's going on? Didn't he say that he was indifferent to these barbarians and had no interest in them? Why did he suddenly feel that his heart had softened? He withdrew his hand, turned around and walked back to his original place and sat down. After a moment she heard him say, "This time, you probably know the people of the Divine Wood clan who came with you, right?" Yi breathed a sigh of relief after his hand left her head, but after hearing this she became a little nervous. At the same time she had a faint feeling that the fate of her clan was about to be decided. She hesitated for a moment and then said carefully, "I know them all, Lord Priest. What do you want to do?" Lu Qin raised his head slightly and looked at her. Yi was shocked and quickly prostrated on the ground saying, "Lord Priest, don't be angry. I just want to help you. Now I have been sent to serve you. No matter what, you can ask me to do it and I will do my best to do it." Roar. Lu Qin did not make any response, but at this moment, a low roar suddenly came from behind Yi. A huge shadow suddenly appeared and covered her with a strong murderous aura. Leaf screamed and turned her head. What she saw was a bloody mouth and then a huge ferocious wolf head. The sharp fangs were about to pierce her face, and a pair of big eyes like copper bells were staring at her fiercely. It seemed that the next moment, it would pounce on her and swallow her in one bite. Ye's body went limp and she almost fainted. Her body could not help but curl back desperately. After a while she reacted. Wasn't this the huge black wolf that had been following the mysterious priest? Before, it was already very frightening, but now that it was so close to the giant wolf, its ferocious and terrifying aura was even more frightening. He had no doubt that this demon wolf must have killed countless people and eaten countless flesh and blood. Could it be that the purpose of me being placed next to this priest was to become the wolf's food? There was no trace of blood on the barbarian girl's face, and she looked like she was about to be scared to death. At this moment Lu Qin frowned and said, "Enough, Atsu, you're too free, aren't you?" The huge black wolf that was baring its fangs and looking like the most terrifying monster in the world suddenly shrank back. Its original ferocious appearance disappeared in the blink of an eye, and then it returned to its lazy appearance. It grinned and called out, then slowly walked to Lu Chen's side and lay down. It opened its mouth and yawned, but it rested its head on Lu Chen's leg, and then narrowed its eyes again. Yi, who felt that she had escaped from death, slowly recovered after a long while. She gasped and once again knelt on the ground in front of Lu Chen with some difficulty. Lu Chen looked at her helplessly. After a moment of silence he said, "Are you all right?" Yi whispered in a trembling voice, I'm fine." Lu Chen sighed and said, "If you're tired, you can go back and have a rest for a while." Yi shook her head and said, "The leader who led me here just now said that I will be your servant from now on. From today on I will eat, drink and live here. I can't go anywhere." Lu Chen was speechless for a moment. After a moment he said, "Then do as you please." Yi bowed her head and agreed. After a while she looked around again, and then quietly got up and walked to the side to start cleaning up the house. Lu Qin didn't care about her. Anyway, there was nothing important in this house. After waiting for a while, he suddenly seemed to think of something, and then asked Yi casually, "By the way, among your people this time, how many warriors or adult men are there who can fight?" Yi's body trembled and her face suddenly turned pale. Lu Qin waited for a while, but found that he didn't get the answer he wanted. He frowned and looked at her. "What's wrong with you?" He suddenly ran over, knelt in front of Lu Qin and then kowtowed desperately. Her eyes were full of tears and she cried, Your Excellency, I beg you to let my people go. As long as you don't let them die, I'm willing to do whatever you want Yi to do." With that, she seemed to have made a difficult decision. She suddenly put her hand on her animal skin clothes, and was about to tear them off. Chapter 324. With a crisp sound, Yezi exerted her strength and directly tore off more than half of her animal skin clothes. Lu Qin only felt a sudden flash of white light in front of his eyes. At that moment, even a calm and steady person like him was dumbfounded. He stared at Yezi with her mouth half open. For a moment, he was stunned and didn't know what to say or do. He just sat there motionlessly. Atsu, who was originally a little lazy beside Lu Qin, seemed to be shocked. With a quiver, he turned over and jumped up. He looked up at Yezi, who had suddenly revealed half of her body. He stared at her with a pair of dog eyes and didn't make a sound for a long time. The atmosphere in the stone house instantly fell into silence. Yezi closed her eyes tightly, her cheeks flushed. Her heart was shy and indignant, and there was also a kind of desperation, as if she was sacrificing herself for justice. However, after waiting for a long time, she suddenly woke up from her inexplicable emotions, but found that it seemed that the expected thing did not happen. Almost all of the barbarian tribes in the wilderness were dominated by men and women, especially the barbarian women who had been defeated, captured, and turned into female slaves. They had no dignity to speak of. They were often reduced to the playthings of their new masters, or become tools to give birth to future generations. In fact, as long as the barbarian women who fell into such a situation did not want to die, they often hoped to have children. As long as they had offspring, then for the sake of the children, their situation would be improved, or at least they could get a relatively formal identity. In Yezi's original expectation, she was ready to give up her dignity and sacrifice her body. Under normal circumstances, if the opponent was a barbarian, he would most likely have rushed over to push her down and ravage her. But the strange thing was that this situation did not happen now. She stood there, feeling that her surroundings seemed to be empty. No one was approaching and there was no sound. There was only a trace of wind passing over her white skin, bringing a slight chill. Yezi opened her eyes and found that the black-robed priest in front of her had turned around. Instead, his huge black wolf pet was still staring at her. Its pair of fierce eyes were full of surprise and doubt. "Sir." He didn't know what was wrong with this mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest. Why didn't he act like a normal barbarian man? Could it be that he was a great and terrifying priest who possessed the power of the legendary Blackfire witchcraft, so he was different from the other barbarians? But, as a man, his physiological structure should be the same and normal as the barbarians. Ye's imagination began to run wild. At the same time, he was a little shocked and afraid. He was worried that if his actions did not tempt the priest and instead angered him, wouldn't it bring a great disaster to his clansmen? Thinking of this, Yi felt her legs turn to jelly. It had to be admitted that Yi was not a very knowledgeable and capable barbarian. In fact, she was just an ordinary barbarian girl in the Divine Wood tribe. At most, her beauty and skin were passable, but she had grown up in the tribe and only knew some basic rules of the barbarian world. Given time, if nothing had changed, she would have found the strongest and bravest warrior in the tribe and married him. Then she would serve him wholeheartedly and bear his children. When her husband went to war, she would worry and pray for him. When he returned safely, she would be filled with joy. She would work hard day and night, living an ordinary life. Until one night this year, when the terrifying shadow of the black-robed priest covered the sky and the sun. When the terrifying shadow demon descended from the sky, the Blackfire tribe was invaded by the witchcraft warriors. Then the Divine Wood tribe, which had lasted for many years, perished. She and many other clansmen became the black-robed priest's captives. She should have hated him. In fact, deep down in her heart, she still loathed and hated this person. However, fear was a stronger emotion in her heart. That night, it overwhelmed everything else. She didn't even dare to have any thoughts of hatred in front of this man. According to the legends, the shamans and priests were omnipotent, and some could even read people's minds. How is he going to deal with me? It's fine if I die, but don't drag others down with me. Just when Yezi's mind was in a mess and all kinds of distracting thoughts came one after another, Lu Qin coughed softly and said, "You, put on your clothes first." Yezi was stunned for a moment. She was a little embarrassed at first, but then she felt a burst of joy in her heart. From the tone of the priest, it seemed that he wasn't angry. However, it was said that these big shots were temperamental. No one could be sure what they would do in the next moment. Yezi hurriedly agreed, and then hurriedly put on the animal skin clothes that she had just torn off. The only thing that was a little awkward was that the animal skin clothes were originally sewn. Just now, she had the determination to tear it apart regardless of everything. Even if she died here today, it didn't matter at all, so when she tore it, she didn't even think about what to do if she had to wear it again later. She saw that the animal skin clothes had been directly torn in half. No matter how Yezi tried to cover it, it was not secure. Either the front part fell off or the back part was exposed. In the end, Yezi had no choice but to take off the two pieces of animal skin from the front and back with a red face. She directly tied them together with a knot, and then tied them above her chest regardless of the part above her waist. Only then did she barely cover her body, and it was not too ugly. However, in this way her petite figure was even more alluring. Lu Qin, who turned around and saw this scene, rolled his eyes in his heart. He thought that it was fortunate that this barbarian girl had a barbarian face and two small fangs that were similar to that of a beast. Otherwise the temptation was really not small. But in any case, even if Lu Qin was not a gentleman for so many years and had done many shady things, he still had no interest in a barbarian woman. So, after glancing at Yezi's exquisite body, he turned his eyes away, frowned and said to Yezi, "I just want to ask, how many warriors are left in your tribe now? Why do you look like the sky is falling down?" Yezi's eyes were red and there were faint tears in them. She knelt on the ground again and said, "I beg you, Your Excellency, please let my people go." Lu Qin sighed, walked to her and sat down, saying, "What are you thinking in your heart? Tell me clearly." Yezi hesitated for a moment, but still lowered her head and said, "It turned out that in the southern wilderness, because the barbarians were fierce and warlike, there were often tribal wars in the past. Since there was war, there was naturally blood, death, and captives. The barbarians were not polite to the captives. With their fierce nature, one could easily imagine the fate of those captives. The women could be divided up like property. If the men were not tortured to death, they would be forced to do some extremely dangerous work. Or they would be forced to charge at the front lines in the next battle. They would be used as cannon fodder to exhaust the enemy's strength." Yezi naturally knew these things. In fact, she did not have much hope, but on the night of the extinction of the tribe, Lu Qin gave them hope, saying that they should be treated equally and become a part of the Black Fire tribe. This was naturally very different from the treatment of captives in most barbarians' minds. But it was this little bit of hope, coupled with the oppression of the tragic fate of their families, that led to so many people being forced to surrender. Yezi had just heard Lu Qin's words, not including women and children, but only the number of adult men. This immediately triggered the most terrifying thought in her heart, and she immediately lost control. After listening to the barbarian girl lying on the ground in front of him, intermittently sobbing from time to time, Lu Qin did not know whether to laugh or cry. He shook his head and said with a wry smile, "You've misunderstood. I didn't mean that." Yezi's body stiffened, and she immediately raised her head to look at the black-robed priest. Her eyes were filled with surprise, and it seemed that even the hidden hatred seemed to have faded a lot. Lu Qin waved his hand and said, "I have no intention of going back on what I said to you. As long as I am here, I will naturally do it. You can also say these words to your people when you go back." Yezi nodded repeatedly and said, I will. Thank you, Your Excellency, thank you." Lu Qin snorted and said, "Now you should be relieved. Now can you tell me how many men there are in your Divine Wood tribe?" Yezi did not answer directly. She looked a little hesitant. Lu Qin said with some amusement, "Do you have a brain or not? I'm just asking you in passing. Do you think I won't know if you don't tell me? Believe it or not, I can go out and find a few leaders of the Blackfire tribe and ask them directly." Yezi thought that it was true and immediately became a little discouraged. She could only say with some embarrassment, "About 40 people." Lu Qin was a little surprised, but then he understood. Of course, not all of them were the warriors of the Divine Wood tribe in the past. There should be a lot of them just to make up the numbers. He pondered for a moment and waved his hand, saying, "Go and call those men over." Yezi was a little worried again, but after seeing Lu Qin's expression, She did not dare to say anything more. She could only agree and go out. And after watching her leave, Lu Qin subconsciously felt a sense of relief. The burst of dazzling white just now was dazzling. It was really rare to see a barbarian woman with such good skin. At this moment, Hei Lang suddenly let out a low growl. Lu Qin glanced at it and said, "What are you doing?" "Behave." Atsu looked at him with a look of contempt. Lu Qin coughed dryly and turned around saying, "I was stunned just now." "Stunned, do you understand?" "I was stunned, so I didn't mean to stare." Lu Qin ignored it and walked slowly to the side. Then he muttered in a low voice, "I didn't expect it to be so big." Chapter 325. When Yezi came out of the mysterious black-robed priest's house, she was seen by many people in the Black Fire Tribe's camp. Then almost everyone saw her disheveled appearance. It couldn't be helped. When she went in, she was wearing a complete set of clothes from her neck to her waist, but when she came out, she could only barely cover her chest. Even if one were to say that nothing had happened, one would have to believe it. However, perhaps because of Lu Chen's recent reputation, and the fact that the barbarians generally revered the priest, no one really stepped forward or loudly discussed anything. Everyone just watched the barbarian girl walk away with complicated emotions, and then began to whisper to each other. Of course, Yezi could feel the strange gazes of the people around her. She blushed again and felt a little annoyed. But when she looked down at her torn clothes that could only be tied together, she could only walk away silently. These clothes were torn by him. If he had to blame someone, he really didn't know who to blame. Just like that, she walked quickly with her head down, and soon returned to the place where the Black Fire Tribe had settled the Divine Wood Tribe captives. After being exterminated, they became captives under someone else's roof, and even their survival depended on the mood of others. The Divine Wood Tribe members here were naturally very sensitive. The news that Hoi Yan had come to pick Yezi and give her to Lu Chen as a maid had already spread throughout the Divine Wood Tribe. So when they saw Yezi suddenly return, a large group of people immediately surrounded her. Most of the people walking in front were women, and most of them were slightly older. There were one or two old men beside them, and it seemed that they had some experience or reputation among the Divine Wood Tribe members. These people obviously wanted to ask Yezi if there was any progress outside, and if the black-robed priest intended to keep his promise. But soon, everyone's eyes suddenly fell on Yezi. Looking at the girl who was still fully clothed when she left in the morning, and now revealing her fair waist and smooth and alluring shoulders, while her clothes only covered her chest, many people's gazes immediately changed. After a moment of silence, a group of women rushed forward and squeezed the other old men and men to the back, surrounding Yezi tightly in the middle. In an instant, countless questions rushed into Yezi's ears. "Yezi, what happened to you? Did that priest sleep with you? Poor child, that beast must be very fierce. Look, even his clothes have been torn in half. Does your body hurt? How pitiful. Come over here. And he will give you a hug." Yezi felt her head buzzing and almost dizzy, but she still heard some of the questions in the noise. She quickly replied, No, I'm fine. I really didn't. Sai, such a good girl, she should have been married to our tribe's warriors and given birth to our children. Who would have thought that she would be defiled by the Black Fire Tribe's bastards? Before Yezi could finish her words, she was interrupted by a wave of comforting voices filled with sadness, pity, and heartache. The barbarian aunties around her kept comforting her, pushing her around and holding her in their arms, telling her not to be sad, not to be sad. This was inevitable for a woman in her life, and it didn't matter if she was bitten by a dog when she went out for a walk. Moreover, now that the Sacred Wood Tribe had fallen into such a miserable state, they could only depend on the Black Fire Tribe. The black-robed priest's position in the Black Fire Tribe was not to be underestimated. Having a woman serve him was a good thing for everyone. At first, Yezi wanted to continue to argue, but after being interrupted several times and hearing the words of the people around her, she suddenly lowered her head, and her eyes were a little red. It was still noisy around her. Everyone seemed to be comforting her. Later, a few respectable elderly people squeezed in and solemnly told Yezi that they hoped she would be more open-minded and not be sad. They hoped that she would serve the black-robed priest carefully and endure any grievances. If she was sad, she could come back and tell everyone. Then it would be fine. At least in this way, everyone would be able to live a better life. Later, Yezi cried and shed tears. Surrounded by her clansmen and surrounded by seemingly warm hugs, her tears inexplicably flowed like pearls with a broken string. She couldn't stop even if she wanted to. Yezi went back to change her clothes and then returned to the stone house where Lu Chen was. But at this moment she was accompanied by a group of men from the Sacred Wood tribe. The barbarians of the Black Fire tribe who noticed the commotion here were quickly attracted over. After all, there were suddenly so many foreigners in the tribe's camp. Although the higher-ups had said that they would merge into one after the annexation, it didn't mean that the Black Fire tribe would accept these people of different surnames from the Sacred Wood tribe. Moreover, there didn't seem to be such an example in the southern wilderness since ancient times. Among the crowd of onlookers from the Black Fire tribe, there were many strong adult men. They were the Black Fire barbarian warriors. Although they looked at Lu Chen's stone house with awe, when they looked at the Sacred Wood tribe captives, their gazes were not very friendly. There was even some hostility and vigilance. After all, they had been fighting to the death not long ago. But what happened next was beyond most people's expectations. After Lu Chen walked out of the stone house, he didn't avoid the onlookers and directly looked at the captives. He pointed at them and eliminated about half of the old and weak, leaving about 20 of the strongest men. After that, Lu Chen returned to the stone house with the huge black wolf and Yezi. The people who were eliminated went back first, leaving the remaining 20 people standing outside the house at a loss. After a while, footsteps sounded in the stone house again, but this time it was Yezi who walked out alone. Her expression looked a little complicated, but she was generally calm. Under the gaze of the crowd, she walked towards the 20 people and pointed at one of them, asking him to follow her into the stone house. At this time, not only were the remaining people bewildered, even the onlookers from the Black Fire tribe did not understand what the black-robed priest was going to do. They all whispered to each other. But just as they were whispering to each other, an inexplicable aura suddenly emanated from the dim stone house. Although it was not as exaggerated as the sky changing color, and although there were no abnormalities or obvious changes, everyone seemed to feel their hearts beating violently. Then for a moment the stone house seemed to be completely dark. It was shrouded in incomparably deep darkness, and in the deepest part of the dark shadow, there seemed to be a flame suddenly burning. No one could see the flame. It was just a feeling. Perhaps it was because the flame was black. Everyone quietened down and stared at the dark stone house. After waiting for a while, it seemed like a long time. Finally, the darkness seemed to slowly fade, and after a while, a figure slowly walked out. It was the Divine Wood warrior who was called in by Yezi. At this moment, the strong barbarian warrior looked a little defeated, and his expression was a little complicated. He looked a little nervous, a little worried, and a little excited. Moreover, he seemed to be relieved. All kinds of strange and contradictory feelings appeared on this barbarian at the same time. No one could figure out what he had experienced just now. And before the surrounding people could gather around to ask, another set of footsteps came from the house. Soon the barbarian girl Yezi walked out again. After looking around expressionlessly, she pointed at another barbarian waiting outside and asked him to follow her in. When Yezi and the somewhat uneasy man entered the stone house again, the surrounding Divine Wood warriors immediately surrounded the first barbarian warrior and began to ask questions. The surrounding Black Fire tribe people also stretched their necks to get closer to them. They were also very curious. In the crowd, the barbarian warrior with a complicated expression was silent for a moment. Suddenly he stretched out his hand and pulled open the front of his shirt, revealing his strong chest. Immediately the surrounding people's gazes fell on his bulging muscles. Suddenly everyone became silent. Where the crowd's line of sight could reach, there was now a totem symbol that was shaped like a blazing flame on the vital point of his chest. The totem symbol was completely black, deep and murderous, and it looked as if it would really burst into flames at any moment. That was the totem symbol of the Black Fire tribe. With the appearance of this symbol, there was a sudden uproar in the crowd further away. Several people, almost all of them warriors of the Black Fire tribe, cried out in surprise. In the middle of their foreheads, there was also the same rune. It was the same rune that Lu Chen used to cast the Black Fire witchcraft to demonize them. Chapter 326. The appearance of the Black Fire rune on the Divine Wood tribe warrior caused an even greater uproar and surprise among the Black Fire tribe compared to the group of captives. Everyone whispered to each other, anger and surprise on their faces. At the same time, a few strong barbarian warriors even turned around and ran into the distance. After a while, a group of people surrounded Hui Yan and walked over with large strides. The group of people in front quickly felt that something was wrong and quickly made way for them, including the group of Divine Wood tribe captives. Although there was still a hint of unwillingness on their faces, there was also a hint of fear on their faces. Most of them lowered their heads and retreated to the side. People who had just been exterminated and captured would never have the courage to resist. Moreover, when this group of aggressive Black Fire Tribe warriors walked over, each of them looked like a fiend. At the same time, many people noticed that some of them had blades and axes hanging on their bodies, intentionally or unintentionally. In the world of the barbarians, knives and axes only had one use, and that was to kill. Hui Yan stood in front of this group of warriors with a solemn expression. His face looked a little gloomy, while the other Black Fire Tribe warriors all had different expressions. There was reverence, anger, fear, and even a little worry. However, when they felt a dark aura surging out from the stone house, almost everyone stopped in their tracks. That was the power of witchcraft. Every warrior here, especially those who had experienced the battle with the Divine Wood tribe, could clearly feel it. They also understood the danger of this power more than the other tribesmen who did not know the origin of this power. Hui Yan's face was dark as he stood outside the dark door, staring into the depths of the darkness. His expression was indifferent, making it impossible for others to see what he was thinking. However, they could faintly see that the depths of his pupils were slightly contracting. After an unknown amount of time, the powerful dark aura finally faded. After a while, just like before, Yi sent out another man who had been marked with the black fire rune. She was about to point out the next person when a tall and burly figure suddenly appeared in front of her. Hui Yan's hill-like body stood in front of Yi like a giant beast. Yi subconsciously took 2 steps back, a trace of fear flashing across her face. However, Hui Yan did not pay too much attention to this barbarian girl. His gaze never left the dark stone house. At this moment, he only casually said to Yi in a low voice, "Lead the way, I want to see him." When he said this, Hui Yan's expression was not particularly fierce, but there was an inviolable aura in his tone. Yi secretly swallowed her saliva and then agreed in a low voice. She did not dare to call anyone else and just turned around to lead Hui Yan into the stone house. Following behind Hui Yan were Tai Xiong Heinyo, and a group of his trusted warriors. Seeing this, they also wanted to follow, but when Hui Yan was about to reach the doorstep, his body paused for a moment, then he turned around and suddenly ordered, "You guys wait outside." After saying this, he directly walked into the stone house without saying a word. Iron Bear, Black Bull, and the rest of the Black Fire warriors looked at each other. However, after a while they finally spread out in 2s and 3s around the stone house. Then, intentionally or unintentionally, they surrounded the stone house and the 20 Divine Wood warriors outside. The moment he walked into the stone house, Hui Yan suddenly felt a feeling of darkness in front of him. After a while, when his eyes gradually adapted to the darkness, he saw a figure sitting in front of the stone house. At the same time, there was an extremely large figure lying on the ground beside him. A pair of slightly green eyes glanced at him. Needless to say, it was naturally Lu Chen and Atsu. He walked up nervously and hurriedly, kneeling in front of the black-robed priest. When he stammered and wanted to explain something, Lu Chen casually waved his hand and said indifferently, "No need to say anything. This is our tribe's warrior leader. He can come whenever he wants." Hui Yan's expression was grave and stern. He did not reply. Instead, he slowly walked over and stopped a few feet in front of Lu Chen. Hui Yan's sturdiness were extremely outstanding even among the barbarian race's warriors. Originally, his stature was much larger than Lu Chen's. At this moment, Lu Chen was sitting on the ground while he was standing. The difference between the two of them seemed to be even greater. It was as if an angry giant beast was staring at a small beast in front of it. He knelt to the side and looked at this somewhat tense and stiff scene. For some reason, his heart suddenly jumped to his throat. He was so nervous that he did not dare to breathe. However, Lu Chen's expression seemed to be very calm. He only lightly raised his head and looked at Hui Yan. He then pointed at the seat in front of him and said, "Sit." Hui Yan did not comply and sat down. He coldly looked at Lu Chen and said in a low voice, "Why did you do this?" Lu Chen didn't answer him immediately. Instead, he silently sat where he was. After a while, he didn't look at the giant like Hui Yan standing not far away from him. Instead, he faintly said, "Ever since you were young, didn't your father, the chief of the tribe, teach you to respect and observe some etiquette towards the tribe's priests?" As he said this, the atmosphere in the dark stone house suddenly became a bit more tense. A chill that seemed to be able to freeze one's bones began to spread in this place. Ye's whole body began to tremble slightly. She subconsciously curled up her body desperately. At the same time, in the depths of her heart, an idea suddenly flashed like a flash of lightning. These two people, the two most powerful people in the Black Fire tribe, seemed to be at odds with each other. You go out first. Just as Ye's mind was in a state of panic and confusion, a voice suddenly sounded in front of her. It was Huoyan who suddenly said this. His voice was low and calm. When he spoke, he did not even look at Ye's direction. It was obvious that he did not care about this divine wood tribe girl at all. He looked at Lu Chen with trepidation. When she saw him lightly wave his hand, she jumped up as if she had been pardoned and quickly walked out of the stone house. The moment she stepped out of the door, when light shone on her from outside, Yi somehow had the illusion that she had returned to the human world from hell. She let out a long sigh of relief. But very quickly she found that there were many barbarian warriors standing around her. Each of them had a cold expression on their faces as they looked in her direction. On their hands, the sharp edges of the blades and axes were flashing with cold light. Ye's heart that had just warmed up suddenly turned cold again. Then it sank again. In the stone house, when there were no outsiders present, the atmosphere actually began to ease a little. Even the giant wolf Atsu that had been snuggling up to Lu Chen did not show any hostility or vigilance towards Huoyan. Huoyan silently sat down in front of Lu Chen. After which, he raised his head to look at the latter. Very quickly he discovered that Lu Chen was still wearing the white bone mask. His brows involuntarily furrowed as his expression turned a little ugly. Why are you wearing that again? Lu Chen took off the white bone mask from his face and placed it at the side. He said, when I inscribe the black fire runes on the bodies of those divine wood tribe people, I need them to not be too resistant, otherwise it will be very troublesome. I found that wearing this thing was quite useful, probably because this mask was passed down from their ancestors. When they saw me wearing it, they would feel relaxed and they wouldn't be too hostile towards me, which made it easier for them to cast their spells. Huoyan snorted and said, why do you want to use this kind of spell on them? You should know that this is a power that belongs to our black fire tribe. By the end of his sentence, Huoyan had already raised his voice, showing the anger in his heart. Lu Chen did not look too surprised, nor did he speak up to defend himself. He only looked at him indifferently and said, I told you before, the Black Fire Tribe's warriors are too few, not enough to support our ambition of reviving the Black Fire Tribe as soon as possible. Therefore I can only find another way. The 20 people outside are also strong barbarian warriors. After receiving the Black Fire runes, they will also become valiant warriors. In this way the strength of the Black Fire Tribe will increase by another level. Huoyan said angrily, nonsense. You're being reckless. In the future, every time you destroy a tribe, are you going to steal their warriors to do this? Yes. Lu Chen said calmly, didn't I already tell you about this idea? This is the most effective way to increase the strength of the Black Fire Tribe in a short period of time. Huoyan took a deep breath and shook his head, saying, but I also told you that this method is not appropriate. You should know that if there are too many of these foreign tribes with the power of demonization, even more than the warriors of our Black Fire Tribe, when the time comes, what should we do? Chapter 327. Backlash. Lu Chen raised his eyes slightly and looked at the solemn Huoyan. He asked in a slightly astonished tone. Huoyan frowned and said, what, am I wrong? Lu Chen pondered for a moment and said, you're thinking too much. Firstly, the demonization of warriors is a kind of witchcraft. If I don't use it, they won't be able to obtain that kind of power. Huoyan's expression did not relax. He stared at Lu Chen and said, but if you continue to do this, there will be more and more warriors of the foreign races. Is there no risk? Once they reach a certain time, their numbers are too many, or they suddenly turn on us after demonizing on the battlefield, what will we do at that time? Lu Chen said indifferently, this is the second thing I wanted to tell you earlier. That black flame rune just happens to be able to control these divine wood race members. Once someone has any disloyal thoughts just by relying on this thing, I have a way to instantly kill them. Huoyan was startled. His face revealed an astonished expression. He said, what? The black flame seal pattern has this kind of effect? Lu Chen looked at him with a smile that was not a smile. He said, what do you think? If it wasn't like that, why would I spend so much effort to slowly cast the curse one by one? Right, I forgot to tell you. The true name of the black flame seal pattern isn't the black flame seal pattern. It is a variant of witchcraft. Its original name is the black flame curse. He smiled. His smile looked calm and serene, but there seemed to be an indescribable throbbing in his eyes at that moment. That isn't a seal pattern. It's a kind of curse. The atmosphere in the stone house suddenly became a bit colder. No one spoke for a while. Then after a while Huoyan suddenly stood up. Standing before Lu Qin, his tall stature looked extremely out of place. Furthermore, there was a faint, biting, cold, murderous aura emanating from his body. Lu Qin seemed to have sensed something and he slowly stood up and said, "What's wrong?" Huoyan looked deeply at him, his gaze exceptionally sharp, like two daggers staring at Lu Qin. Then he slowly said, "Did you cast this curse on me and my black fire warriors?" Lu Qin didn't seem to be frightened by the barbarian's murderous aura. He even smiled faintly and said calmly, "I only know of one type of black flame curse. Of course it's the same type." Clang. A crisp sound rang out. It was Huoyan's sudden growl. He reached out his hand and pulled out the dagger that was hanging on his waist. The bright light of the dagger was pointed at Lu Qin. On the other side, the giant wolf Atsu, who was originally a little lazy, suddenly jumped up. With a roar, it bared its sharp fangs at Huoyan and pretended to pounce on him. In the dark stone house, the atmosphere suddenly became tense. The two sides seemed to be confronting each other, and the situation seemed to be on the verge of exploding. Huoyan didn't pay attention to the growling Atsu beside Lu Qin. Instead, he stared at Lu Qin and gripped the dagger in his hand tightly. He said word by word, "Why?" Lu Qin shook his head and said, "No reason. I've already told you the black flame curse is just like this. I can use the fire god staff to cast a variant spell to demonize you and increase your strength for a short period of time. But in the end, this kind of curse is still a curse. It naturally has the power to kill." He looked up at Huoyan and said, "It seems like you don't like it?" Huoyan's breathing was slightly hurried, his fangs crossed. He growled and said, "Who would like to have this kind of thing on their body? If that's the case, the lives of me and the other warriors will be in your hands. I can help you get rid of it now." Lu Qin suddenly interrupted him and said calmly. Huoyan was stunned for a moment as if he couldn't react in time. He looked at Lu Qin in shock. Lu Qin said, "You and the other black fire warriors, if you need it, I can help you get rid of this black flame curse. But correspondingly, you will lose the power of demonization on the battlefield." Huoyan's expression changed intensely, but he still didn't say anything. Lu Qin looked at this barbarian man, a strange light flashed in the depths of his eyes. He said, "I think you're just afraid that I can control everyone's life and death. My power is too great and I can even control the tribe? In fact, I still stand by my words. Your barbarian tribe is not worthy of my attention. I don't care about the things that you value so much. If you're afraid, give me the way to return to the north. I will get rid of all your curses now, then give up everything here and leave by myself. From then on, I will have nothing to do with your black fire tribe." Huoyan looked at Lu Qin. Lu Qin didn't look away either, calmly looking at him. After a while, Huoyan's expression changed. Suddenly he turned his head away. The anger on his face quickly dissipated, and he slowly put away the blade in his hand. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Let me think about it first." Lu Qin smiled mockingly, then his expression returned to normal and he nodded. Huoyan turned and walked out. Just as he was about to reach the door, he suddenly squatted down and turned back to Lu Qin. "Don't tell anyone about this secret." Lu Qin nodded and said, "I know." Huoyan looked at him deeply, then turned and walked out. The day's tense atmosphere gradually calmed down as Huoyan silently walked out of the black-robed priest's stone house and took away all the Black Fire Tribe warriors. As for Lu Qin, he didn't seem to be affected by this matter. After Huoyan left, he continued to summon people into the stone house and cast the mysterious black fire seal on them. No one knew what happened between Huoyan and the black-robed priest in the dark stone house, or what they talked about. Iron Bear, Black Bull, and the other Black Fire Tribe warriors were very curious about this. They secretly asked Huoyan a few times, but Huoyan kept a straight face and didn't say anything. With the help of the Black Fire Tribe's powerful divine weapon, the Fire God Staff, the black-robed priest, Lu Qin, spent a day's work and finally cast the Black Fire Seal on all 20 people. After this, the abnormally tired Lu Qin drove them away. He only said that he would send Yi to summon them again in 2 days, and that they would know what he was going to do next. This answer obviously didn't satisfy the 20 Divine Wood warriors, but facing the black-robed priest, no matter how fierce they were, they didn't dare to be impudent. In the end, they could only leave dispiritedly. However, many people secretly warned Yi to act according to the situation and try to find out what this terrifying black-robed priest was thinking. Yes, for this goal they must do everything they can. Although they didn't say it explicitly, the meaning was very clear. Leaf also understood, but she did not seem to have any more emotional fluctuations. At most, she just nodded silently. Finally, after sending everyone off, she slowly walked back to the dark stone house. Ever since Lu Qin brought Atsu to live here, the stone house had never been lit with any torches or candles. It seemed that this mysterious black-robed priest was very disgusted with things like flames. When this thought flashed through Ye's mind, she couldn't help but be a little surprised. She thought to herself, "Your tribe is called Black Fire and you worship a fire god. Why would the tribe priest hate flames and light?" But for some reason, when she left the familiar crowd outside and returned to this dark place, when the darkness and shadows quietly blocked the light behind her and the eyes of those people, Yi suddenly felt a sense of relief. She actually seemed to be relieved from the bottom of her heart. She was shocked by this feeling and then she quickly felt a sense of guilt. She secretly clenched her teeth and scolded herself. "What's wrong with you?" A voice suddenly came from the front. It was the black-robed priest's deep voice in the dark corner. He still sounded a little tired, but he seemed to have noticed something. His eyes penetrated the darkness and fell on Yi. There seemed to be some light in his eyes. Yi was startled and quickly bowed her head. "I'm fine." "That's good," Lu Qin said lightly and then closed his eyes. It seemed that he didn't want to pursue the matter, or perhaps he had no interest in the feelings of these barbarians. Yi, who was a little nervous, was startled for a moment. After a while, she finally understood that her new master seemed to be too lazy to talk to her. She was a little embarrassed and a little cramped. After turning her head to look around, she wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. It seemed that she wanted to stand up and lean against the corner. Lu Qin suddenly said, "You sleep here." Yi glanced at him and found that the place Lu Qin pointed to was the farthest wall from her. She was relieved, but soon she remembered the important task entrusted to her by the villagers before she came here. Those eager eyes, so many people's hope of life and death, all seemed to depend on her alone, even if it might make her sink into the terrible hell to spy on the most terrible person in the world. Yi felt a little cold, but she still gritted her teeth and quietly cried for herself in the deepest part of her heart. Then she squeezed out a smile and slowly approached the black-robed priest. "Your Excellency, do you need me to serve you?" Lu Qin, who had closed his eyes to rest, frowned slightly and opened his eyes again. He found that Yi, who was approaching him, was trembling slightly, but it seemed that she had summoned up her courage and slowly reached out to untie her clothes. Lu Qin was silent. After a moment he said, "Don't smile. I think your smile is ugly." Chapter 328. Ye's hand suddenly froze in front of her chest, and then she looked at the black-robed priest with shame and anger. However, Lu Qin obviously didn't mean to pay attention to her. He just waved his hand and said, "Go sleep over there, don't disturb me." "Yes," Yi answered in a low voice. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt relieved, and the anger she had before disappeared. Even when she looked at Lu Qin, she felt that this black-robed priest didn't seem to be as terrible and disgusting as she had imagined. However, memories quickly surfaced in her mind. That day in the old tribal camp, many of the clansmen she had known since she was young had died under the hands of this black-robed priest, died in that terrifying black fire. That painful howl was still reminding her, making Yi suddenly feel very ashamed of her weakness just now. She lowered her head and walked back to the corner of the wall that belonged to her, and unexpectedly found that there were 2 or 3 animal skin mattresses there. She was startled for a moment and looked back, only to see that Lu Qin's figure had merged with the darkness, as if he had become a part of the shadow, making it hard to see him clearly. She stared at that side for a moment, and then gritted her teeth, gently moved the animal skin mattresses to the side, and then lay down against the wall. The ground and the wall were very cold, but the animal skin mattresses not far away looked unusually warm. Ye's body trembled slightly, but in the end she still closed her eyes. She had seen and heard too many things that day and also suffered a lot of stimulation and shock. At first she felt very awake and couldn't fall asleep, but after lying down for a while her eyelids started to droop, and she unknowingly fell asleep. Many people saw the scene of Hui Yan rushing in angrily that day. Some were surprised and some were secretly delighted. But in the end, Hui Yan went into the stone house alone and stayed for a long time. When he came out again he didn't say a word and left with his men. This also made many people who were originally nervous, or wanted to see a good show, shocked. In the following days, with the changes in the tribe's camp and various situations, the deeds of Lu Qin, the black-robed priest, began to be known by everyone, immediately shocking the entire Black Fire tribe. 3 days after Hui Yan left Lu Qin's place, the chief of the Black Fire tribe, Hua Hu, found him. The father and son had a serious conversation. At the same time, there were also 6 elders who were highly respected in the tribe. They were elders that Hui Yan had to greet whenever he met them. In this conversation, Flaming Tiger straightforwardly expressed his distrust of Lu Qin to his son. At the same time, he sternly warned him that there had never been an outsider who had become a priest of the Black Fire tribe, and Lu Qin's behavior after becoming a priest was incompatible with the behavior of all the great priests in the history of the tribe. This person is not of our race, so he definitely has ulterior motives. He was definitely not an emissary of the fire god. He was a minion of the devil. If we don't get rid of this black-robed priest, then our Black Fire tribe will perish in the hands of this terrifying human. The other 6 elders in the meeting all agreed, either solemnly or tactfully persuading Hui Yan, telling him not to be muddle-headed and to wake up as soon as possible. Everyone said that our Black Fire tribe has lived in this wasteland for thousands of years, following the rules of our ancestors. We have always lived well and there is no need for any changes. That black-robed priest has gone against the rules, committed outrages, and even used the witchcraft of the Black Fire tribe on those captives. Such vile behavior will soon provoke the wrath of the fire god, and he may even send down divine punishment. When that time comes, won't we both be sinners of the tribe? When he reached the end of his speech, Hua Hu stood in front of his son. His aged face seemed to be somewhat distorted from his emotions. He grabbed Hui Yan's arm and said in a hoarse voice, "I'm old, son. The position of tribe leader will be yours sooner or later. As long as you kill that human, I will immediately abdicate and hand over the position of tribe leader to you." From the beginning to the end, Hui Yan, who had been unusually silent, finally stood up. But strangely, his face did not reveal the excited and sudden awakening expression that Hua Hu and the other elders wanted to see. This tall and sturdy barbarian was in the prime of his life. He was a barbarian in his prime. He was majestic and mighty, and had the ambition and meticulousness that ordinary men did not have. He could see further than them and he stood taller than them. Occasionally, when he turned his head back, Hui Yan would realize that he no longer had any companions by his side. There was a bit of pain and disappointment in the depths of his eyes, but his expression was still calm. He stood up in front of the most senior elders of the tribe, and said in front of his father, Fire Tiger, "You don't have to worry about these things in the future." After saying that, he ignored the astonished and angry gazes around him, turned around and walked out, leaving behind a room of angry elders and a suffocating atmosphere. Lu Qin only learned of this matter from Hui Yan the next day at noon. When Hui Yan came to find him, Lu Qin had just finished training the 20 strong Divine Wood warriors and let them go back first. The so-called training, of course, did not mean that Lu Qin would teach these barbarian warriors how to kill people or how to use weapons. Instead, it was to let these people familiarize themselves with the demonized state that he would enter after casting the spell, and how to better kill people. Apart from this, Lu Qin also told all the Divine Wood warriors that when casting the demonized sorcery, he would also plant the world's most vicious curse on everyone's body. If anyone dared to betray him, they would be burned alive in the terrifying black flames. After death, even their souls would not be able to escape, let alone return to the embrace of their ancestors and gods. But as long as all of you listen to my orders and serve me loyally, as long as you achieve great merit, you will be able to remove this curse. At the same time, from this day onwards, all the Divine Wood warriors would be known as the Black Fire Guards, and would only listen to the orders of the black-robed priest. These words of course quickly spread throughout the entire Black Fire tribe, and at the same time caused a huge uproar. It also became the evidence that the elders of the Black Fire tribe increasingly hated Lu Qin. When the sun set that evening, when Hui Yan sat with him in the stone house, this barbarian already looked somewhat disappointed. Lu Qin looked at him and said, "What's wrong, are you unable to bear it?" Hui Yan waved his hand and closed his eyes as he leaned against the wall. After a while, he said, "I didn't expect Father and the other elders to be so short-sighted. They can't see at all why I want to push this matter forward." Lu Qin sighed, walked to his side and sat down, saying, "You're wrong." Hui Yan opened his eyes and looked at him, saying, "What do you mean?" Lu Qin said, "You can see so much foresight and do so many daring things, that's because you are a unique and different barbarian. Among so many tribes in the wilderness, how many barbarians like you are there? You can't even find one in an ordinary tribe. Perhaps it's normal that they don't understand you?" Hui Yan smiled bitterly and said softly, "I just want to restore the glory of my ancestral tribe. I don't deserve such praise." He paused and frowned, saying, "Oh right, can you keep a low profile when dealing with those 20 Black Fire Guards? You know what the situation is now. Demonizing every day is like stabbing their hearts with a knife. Lu Qin shrugged, saying, I can't help it, time is too tight. Huoyan was startled, saying, What do you mean? Lu Qin said indifferently, In 3 days, Thunder Lizard, Ghost Fox and Mountain Spirit, you can choose one of these 3 tribes. Huoyan was shocked and stood up abruptly, saying, What, how long has it been you're going to fight? Lu Qin said calmly and firmly, The wilderness is so big, there are so many tribes, we don't have time to waste. Even you didn't expect us to start a war so soon, then, those 3 tribes definitely didn't expect it either. Huoyan didn't know what to say for a moment. After a while he said, Sometimes I feel that in the world we barbarians are the most warlike, but compared to you we are worlds apart. Lu Qin sneered. He turned around and walked into the depths of the darkness. At the same time he said, Stop pretending. Anyway, it's just blood and lives. In the wilderness the victor is everything. You're the one who said that to me. Huoyan was silent for a long time, then turned around and walked out of the stone house. As he walked in the open space of the tribe's camp, he occasionally raised his head to look at the dark sky, and suddenly saw a meteor flying across the night sky. That was a bold and unrestrained meteor, emitting a dazzling brilliance, instantly lighting up the entire starry sky, dazzling people's eyes. It flew passionately and fiercely, as if it was rushing forward recklessly, piercing through the darkness, until it finally disappeared into the depths of the distant darkness. Huoyan stared blankly at the meteor's last light disappearing into the night sky, suddenly feeling a chill. When he lowered his head, he found that there was a slight gust of wind in the surroundings. In the darkness of the wilderness the wind was blowing. Chapter 329. This can't go on any longer. An angry roar came from the house. Although it was suppressed, making the voice sound low, some echoes still floated out from the gap of the closed door. One could feel how angry the person in the house was at this moment. Standing outside the closed door were 4 or 5 barbarian males of the Blackfire tribe. They stood a distance away from each other and surrounded the house behind them. At the same time they were vigilantly watching their surroundings. But in the dead of the night, no one would notice anything strange. Of course, the barbarian at the entrance had heard the angry roar just now. He turned his head to look and his eyes were filled with worry. But soon he also turned his head back and cautiously kept his guard up, not allowing any outsiders to come close. At the same time in the room behind the door, a lit lamp illuminated the people inside. In the middle of the room sat the old chief of the Blackfire tribe, Fire Tiger, with his grandson, Fire Eagle, by his side. Aside from the 2 of them, there were 6 other people in the house. They were the 6 tribal elders who had persuaded Huoyan with Flaming Tiger. The one who had roared like a wild beast was one of the 6 elders. His name was Qixi. He didn't look young and was about the same age as Flaming Tiger. He had a head full of white hair and one of his 2 fangs was missing. However, this old man was a fierce general of the Blackfire tribe when he was young. He had been fighting for his entire life. Although he was old, his fierce and valiant aura was still there. At the same time, his irascible temper hadn't changed. At this moment, Qixi's furious roar reverberated within the room. He paced up and down within the room before abruptly turning around and saying loudly to Flaming Tiger, Patriarch, did you hear what I said or not? Flaming Tiger frowned and slightly nodded, indicating that he understood. But his eyebrows were still tightly knitted, as if he had a lot on his mind. Seeing Patriarch Huahu's appearance, the other elders had different expressions. After a while, another elder at the side with a slightly gentler expression pulled Qixi and said in a low voice, All right, Patriarch knows what he's doing. Don't shout randomly. If your voice is too loud and is heard by others, they might run to tell Huoyan or that black-robed priest and there might be big trouble. Qixi snorted heavily, his face filled with anger and reluctance. However, it seemed that he was still somewhat fearful of the 2 people mentioned. Finally he walked to the side and sat down. Only then did this elder, who had persuaded the irascible old barbarian, turn around and look at Huahu. He asked in a low voice, Patriarch, what are your plans now? The wrinkles on Fire Tiger's aged face were deep, as if the harsh wasteland had already engraved the sands of time on his body. On this piece of land, the majority of people couldn't live to Huahu's age, so his knowledge and reputation had always been second to none in the Blackfire tribe. Everyone had always trusted him for many years. That was until his son, Huoyan, grew up and displayed his extraordinary talent and strength in front of the tribe's people. To this day, Every barbarian of the Black Fire tribe believed that Hou Yan would be the next patriarch. His strength, wisdom and courage were unparalleled in the Black Fire tribe. All of this gradually became a public opinion. Sometimes it would make people feel as if everyone was waiting for the day of old Hua Hu's death. Fire Tiger didn't like this feeling. Since a long time ago when his son Hou Yan rose to power, he disliked it. But even if he was the patriarch, he couldn't do anything about it. Therefore he could only remain silent most of the time. Then, with a complicated gaze, he would secretly peep at his son who was growing stronger and stronger day by day. Patriarch. A somewhat surprised voice sounded in Hua Hu's ear, startling him. He woke up from his daze, only to discover that he had unknowingly been in a daze for a while. Is this the feeling of growing old? Hua Hu felt a bit sad for a moment, but he didn't show it on his face. He only muttered to himself for a moment, pretending to be in deep thought. Then he asked, "White Eagle, what do you think?" This elder named White Eagle was also one of the most prestigious elders in the Black Fire tribe. He had assisted Hua Hu for many years and could be said to be deeply trusted by the old patriarch. But it was also because of this that White Eagle understood Hua Hu far better than anyone else. Hua Hu's expression just now had fooled the others, but not White Eagle's eyes. However, White Eagle didn't make any strange expression at this moment. Instead, a trace of worry flashed in the depths of his eyes, and he said to Hua Hu in a low voice, "Patriarch, what Brother Chi Rhino said just now actually makes sense. If we let Hou Yan and that human called Lu Yuan continue to mess around like this, I'm afraid that something big will really happen." Hua Hu didn't immediately speak, but Fire Eagle, who was beside him, asked, "Grandpa White Eagle, what bad things will happen?" White Eagle glanced at Hua Hu, and after a moment of hesitation he said, "First of all, they are too warlike. It has only been a few days since they attacked the Divine Wood tribe, but they are already preparing to attack another tribe. Although the warriors of our Black Fire tribe are brave and valiant, there aren't too many of them. As long as it's a war, there will definitely be casualties, and as time goes on, we will definitely not be able to withstand it." The other elders and Fire Eagle nodded, and then White Eagle said, "Also, now that Lu Qin has also taken the captured Divine Wood warriors as people of the Black Fire tribe. He has also placed Black Fire runes on their bodies and named them Black Fire Guards, and they will only listen to him. What does this mean? If he has any ulterior motives in the future, how will our Black Fire tribe deal with him?" And the worst thing is, at this moment, Chi Rhino, who had just sat down, suddenly stood up again, walked in front of everyone, and said with an agitated expression, "Now we can all see that Lu Qin and Hou Yan plan to continue fighting, and then intend to exterminate the tribe, then capture people, and then use Black Fire runes to increase their fighting strength. But everyone, don't forget, according to their methods, it won't be long before our Black Fire tribe's warriors die, but the other tribes will capture more and more Black Fire Guards and obey the priest. At that time, will the Black Fire tribe still be the Black Fire tribe? In the tribe at that time, who would be the one who kept their word? Will it be us Black Fire barbarians, or that black-robed priest called Lu Qin?" The room was silent, and no one opened their mouth to answer Chi Rhino's straightforward question. Only Fire Eagle, who was still young, suddenly flew into a rage. He turned over and jumped up, saying angrily, "We can't let this happen. Damn it, we should have killed that monster with one strike." Killed that black-robed priest with one strike? The few elders in the room, except for the simple-minded Chi Rhino, who was extremely angry and impulsive, looked at each other. After looking at each other a few times, they all frowned and did not speak. Although most of the barbarians were impulsive, violent, and ferocious as long as they were old and still alive, most of them would have seen a lot of things, experienced a lot of hardships, and understood some of the principles of life. On the contrary, barbarians like Chi Rhino, who had always been impulsive and angry until old, were actually rare in their age group. White Eagle was the same. Compared to when he was young, the current him was especially calm. He didn't answer Fire Eagle's words, but looked at the old Chief Fire Tiger and called out softly, "Chief?" Fire Tiger slowly raised his head and glanced at White Eagle. His voice sounded a little low. "What do you want me to do?" White Eagle wanted to say something but stopped. Chi Rhino, who was next to him, became anxious. He simply took a few steps forward and said, "Chief, the current situation of the tribe is critical. We need you to come out and rectify it." Fire Tiger sighed, and there seemed to be some helplessness on his face. He said, "Rectify? Oh. It's not like you don't know the situation of the tribe. Today, almost all the warriors of the younger generation were brought up by Hou Yan. They can be said to be dead set on him. Even I, the chief, may not be as useful as Hou Yan. White Eagle walked to Fire Tiger's side and sat down. He said softly, "Chief, no matter what, the position of chief is still yours. As long as you speak, the young people of the tribe will have to listen. Even if Hoi Yan's reputation is soaring, as long as he doesn't say anything, as long as you come out, you can still control the situation." Fire Tiger's complexion slightly changed. He looked at White Eagle and said, "What do you mean?" White Eagle was silent, but at the same time the other elders, including Chi Shi, stood up at the same time and walked behind White Eagle. Fire Tiger's complexion greatly changed. He suddenly stood up and stared at these people. He didn't know why, but his old face twisted. Even his voice became a little hoarse. He hissed, "Are you crazy? He is my son." Chapter 330. Behind Huahu, the young fire hawk suddenly stood up, but he seemed a little confused. He didn't seem to understand why his grandfather had suddenly become so agitated, and why the surrounding atmosphere had suddenly become so tense. Fire Hawk instinctively rushed to Huahu's side and grabbed the knife at his waist with one hand. He then looked warily at the tribal elders of his grandfather's generation, and then at his grandfather with some doubts. Opposite him, White Eagle, who was standing in front of the crowd, sighed. He didn't seem to care about Fire Hawk's offending appearance. He even reached out and patted Fire Hawk's shoulder, indicating that he had no malice. Then he looked at Huahu with a complicated expression, saying, "Patriarch, I've been with you for most of my life. At this age, I won't have any other thoughts." Huahu's expression seemed to have calmed down a little. He glanced at White Eagle, then reached out and pulled back his grandson who was in front of him and whispered, "It's all right." Fire Hawk let out an "oh," then Huahu looked at the others. After a long silence he suddenly said, "Hoi Yan said that Lu Qin is the emissary of the fire god, and that he carries the will of the fire god. What do you think?" Before White Eagle could speak, Scarlet Rhinoceros had already shouted, "This is complete nonsense. Since ancient times, not to mention our Black Fire tribe, even among the thousands of tribes in the southern wilderness, which one of them has ever heard of a human being a priest?" Huahu was speechless. White Eagle and the other elders didn't look good, but no one said anything. Scarlet Rhino's words were indeed very reasonable, and the facts of the past were indeed so. But at this moment the people present, intentionally or unintentionally, had all avoided another equally irrefutable fact, and that was that Lu Qin possessed the power of black fire that couldn't be clearer. In any case, he wasn't a barbarian, nor a member of the Black Fire tribe. He didn't have the bloodline of the Black Fire, so there must be something wrong with him. Everything was fake. Even if he had the Black Fire, it must be a trick. Huahu's face was wooden. After a moment he whispered, "Then Hoi Yan?" White Eagle immediately said, "That human race priest's methods are crafty. Perhaps he secretly used some method to confuse nephew Hoi Yan's mind." Before Fire Tiger could say anything, Fire Hawk, who was standing behind him, suddenly became excited. He nodded repeatedly and said, that's right. I also feel that father has been acting a little strange recently. He's been hanging out with that human all day long." "Shut up." Huahu suddenly shouted angrily, interrupting his grandson's words. However, White Eagle, Scarlet Rhino, and the others had already nodded and followed Fire Hawk's words. At the same time they advised Fire Tiger, "Patriarch, even little Fire Hawk thinks so. This is an extremely critical moment. For the future of our Black Fire tribe, you must make a prompt decision." Fire Tiger's complexion was ashen. It seemed as if he had suddenly aged a lot at this moment. He looked at the old people in front of him, then turned his head to look at his grandson, Fire Eagle, who still had a face full of anger. His mouth opened a few times but no words came out. In the end he slowly sat back down. "I'm already old. I don't know how many more years I can live." Fire Tiger's voice sounded particularly hoarse and low, as if he was making a final struggle. He said in a low voice, "Originally, I could not be more at ease with Hoi Yan inheriting the position. But if something happens to me in the future, this is a major matter for the tribe." Everyone looked at each other, not daring to say anything for a moment. Only White Eagle's expression remained the same. He walked to Fire Tiger's side and said, "Patriarch, don't worry. If nephew Hoi Yan is fine, we naturally won't do anything to him. But if he's been bewitched too deeply by that human shaman and is unable to free himself for the future of our tribe, there's nothing we can do." Hearing this, Fire Hawk, who was standing to the side, suddenly trembled. It was as if he had only just understood something. Immediately, his entire face turned pale, and he looked completely devoid of blood. Even his body began to tremble slightly. White Eagle glanced at this young boy and saw the shock, panic, and fear on his face. He frowned slightly, and a trace of disdain flashed in the depths of his eyes. Then he looked at Fire Tiger and said in a low voice, "Moreover, don't you still have Firehawk? He's your grandson and your blood runs through his veins. As long as you focus on nurturing him, us old fellows will definitely support him with all our strength. In a few years I think Firehawk will definitely become a qualified patriarch." When he said the last two words, White Eagle turned to Firehawk and deliberately emphasized his words. Firehawk was dumbfounded, but gradually he seemed to understand something. The emotions in his eyes suddenly became blazing, and even the fear and panic he had just felt were replaced by this new surge of excitement. He was so excited that even his breathing became heavy. But after a moment he suddenly sensed something. He turned his head and saw that his grandfather, Fire Tiger, was staring at him. Firehawk's heart turned cold and he subconsciously lowered his head. Fire Tiger stared at his grandson for a long time, and finally let out a long sigh and slowly shook his head. Before Yi became the mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest's maid, she had always been terrified when she arrived in front of the dark stone house. The advice of her clansmen had given her a tragic feeling, and she felt that she would soon die in that stone house. Perhaps she would even be tortured, but if it was for the sake of so many clansmen, perhaps everything would be worth it. But to her surprise, life in this stone house was different from what she had expected from the beginning. The black-robed priest was silent most of the time, but he did not offend her in any way. Well, perhaps he was not interested in her, and even bluntly said that she had an ugly smile. Well, it's better to be talked to like this than to be thrown on the bed and ravaged, Yezi thought with a bit of joy. In these days the priest named Lu Qin ordered her to do things very naturally. All kinds of chores, including going out to call for her clansmen, were handed over to her. This also brought about another effect, and that was the captured divine wood clansmen now generally believed that the black-robed priest had slept with Yi, and that was why they believed her. In the beginning Yi actually wanted to explain, but she quickly gave up on this idea because she found that it seemed that this was the only way for her clansmen to be happy and live more energetically. Although many people began to look at her with strange emotions, which seemed to be hidden very deeply like some sharp things. Stabbing people. It was very strange and even Yi herself could not figure out why. She felt that she had clearly come to Lu Chen's side for the sake of her clansmen. Although Lu Chen really did not do anything to her, in everyone's impression, shouldn't she have done something good for her clansmen? But why was there disdain and contempt in their eyes? Even if everyone was smiling and comforting her in front of her, the stinging in their eyes had never disappeared. Yi. A sudden call awakened Yi from her daze. Yi quivered and jumped up. She hurriedly ran over to the black-robed priest who was sitting in the dark and said, "Sir, do you have any orders?" Lu Chen looked at her indifferently and said, "Go to the camp and ask the Firehawk chief to come here." Yi replied with an "oh," and agreed. Nowadays Lu Chen had gotten used to ordering her to do these kinds of errands. She, who walked around the camp all day, seemed to have gained the approval of most of the Black Fire clansmen. She turned and walked out. But when she passed by the door, the giant wolf that was lying there like a guard dog suddenly roared at her and bared its teeth fiercely. Yi was so scared that she screamed and took 2 steps back. Seeing that it had scared Leaves, the black wolf Atu barked twice proudly and lay back down as if nothing had happened. Yezi cursed the abominable big black wolf countless times in her heart, but on the surface she could only avoid it awkwardly and even fearfully. In this dim stone house, it seemed that the black-robed priest was actually a decent person, but the beast was particularly abominable, scaring people all day long. A few nights ago, it even lay beside her in the middle of the night and suddenly roared, almost scaring Yezi out of her wits. She did not sleep well for several days. But after that incident, it seemed that the black-robed priest could not stand it anymore. He grabbed the giant wolf named Atsu and scolded it. He seemed to have kicked the giant wolf a few times. Only then did Atsu become more well-behaved, and Yi was gradually able to sleep peacefully. Unexpectedly, this stupid dog seemed to have a problem again today. While thinking, Yi had already walked out of the house and walked forward quickly. Now she was very familiar with the situation in the Black Fire camp. The other Divine Wood tribesmen were still somewhat restricted and could not walk freely in the Black Fire camp. She was the only exception. It was not the first time that she had gone to pass a message to Huoyin on behalf of Lu Qin, so she knew where Huoyin lived. She was very familiar with the way, but when she was about halfway there, Yi suddenly froze and stopped. A man stopped her on the road. After her identity as the black-robed priest's maid was made public, no one deliberately made things difficult for her or stopped her from walking in the camp. Today was the first time. He was a little surprised and a little nervous because she recognized this person. Although this person was not very old, he was very famous in the Black Fire tribe and many people would give in to him. He was Huiying, the grandson of the chief Huahu and the son of the chief Huiyin. He stopped Leaf and looked at Leaf's face with a strange look. Chapter 331. The Fire Falcon was not very old. At most, he could be considered a half-grown boy, so Yezi did not feel anything strange from his body or the way he looked at her. If it were any other adult tribal male, Yezi would usually feel that they were too brave and strong. Based on her past experience, Yezi would usually feel that other people would look at her with a kind of tyrannical and possessive emotion. Whether it was the current victors of the Black Fire tribe or her former homeland, the Divinewood tribe, it was more or less the same. After all, in the wilderness, men were superior to women for many years. In contrast, it seemed that although the black-robed priest called Lu Chen was a little cold to her, he seemed to be far easier to get along with than the others after living in the same room for a period of time. At least during these days, apart from the occasional harassment from the fat, big, stupid dog, Yezi suddenly found that the fear she should have had seemed to have faded a lot. Instead, her mood gradually became more relaxed. Eat well and sleep well? This feeling shocked Yezi. For a moment, she was in a trance, and an unusually complicated feeling flashed through her heart. Opposite her, the Fire Falcon was also startled. He originally thought that if he suddenly jumped out to stop this maidservant called Yezi, she would probably be surprised or scream. Who knew that there would be no surprise, and instead, he found that she was just standing there in a daze. This woman can't be stupid, right? The Fire Falcon thought to himself. After thinking about it, it was indeed very likely. If there were no flaws, the Divinewood tribe probably would not have pushed her out. Hey! After thinking about this, the Fire Falcon suddenly felt a little depressed. He could not be bothered to talk nonsense with Yezi anymore and directly asked, "Where are you going?" After being shouted at by him, Yezi immediately woke up with a start. At the same time, a look of surprise appeared on her face. No matter what, the Fire Falcon's identity was not ordinary, and it was very likely that he would be the future chief of the Black Fire tribe. He could not allow a captive like her to be disrespectful. Therefore, Yezi quickly lowered her head and said carefully, "I'm going to find the chief of the Firehawk tribe." Find my father? The Firehawk frowned, then seemed to have thought of something, and his expression became somewhat ugly. He coldly snorted and said, "Did Lu Chen order you to find my father? What does he want?" He was startled for a moment and faintly felt that something was wrong. He secretly glanced at the Firehawk and said, "Young master, Lord Priest ordered me to invite the Firehawk leader to the stone house to discuss some matters. He didn't tell me anything else." Fire Eagle thought for a moment and probably accepted Ye's explanation. After all, she was just an ordinary maid who had been captured. If there was really something important between her father, Huiyin, and the black-robed priest, he would definitely not let her know. The Firehawk immediately nodded and said, "That's perfect. I just came from my father's place so I don't have to make another trip. Go back and tell Lu Chen that my father and my grandfather are discussing an important matter in his residence, and it just so happens that I need to invite the priest over and ask for his opinion. Go back and ask him to come to my father's residence." Yi was stunned for a moment and said, "You want me to go and ask Lu Chen to come over for a discussion?" The Firehawk glared at her and said angrily, "What? Our Black Fire tribe's chief and chief are both here. Can't we invite him?" Whether or not they could invite the black-robed priest was naturally up to the person called Lu Chen to decide. He was just a little maid who had no choice but to live under someone else's roof. Of course, she did not dare to argue with the Firehawk. After being shouted at like that, she was immediately startled and hurriedly agreed before turning around and running away. The Firehawk looked at the back of the little maid as she ran away with large strides, and the anger on his face slowly dissipated. He then slowly turned around and could vaguely see the stone house where Huiyin lived. As he looked at that place, a trace of haze flashed across his face. Yezi ran all the way back to the black-robed priest's stone house. When she entered the door, Atu, the malicious stupid dog, seemed to want to make fun of her again. Fortunately, Yezi hurriedly shouted to the dark corner inside, Your Excellency, the chief is calling for you." In the depths of the dimly lit stone house, a black shadow shook for a moment. Then Lu Chen's voice came over, Didn't you tell him that I asked you to invite him over? Yi hurriedly told Lu Qin what the Fire Hawk had said to her when she met him on the way here. After Lu Qin heard this, he seemed to be silent for a moment. Then, as if to confirm with her, he repeated, saying, "Just now what that Firehawk said to you was that the chief and the chief of the Firehawk clan are discussing something, and then asked me to go over?" "Yes." Yi nodded repeatedly. Lu Qin seemed to respond casually. Then he quieted down and sat in the same place without any movement. He was a little stunned. At the same time, she thought to herself that this black-robed priest seemed to have an extraordinary position of power in the Black Fire tribe. Even when the chief and chief jointly invited him to a gathering, he dared to be so neglectful. Just as her thoughts were running wild, she suddenly felt a gust of wind in front of her. It turned out that a shadow slowly walked out from the depths of the stone house and walked towards the door. Yi breathed a sigh of relief in her heart. It seemed that this person was not too out of line, she thought. But at this moment, the giant black wolf Atsu that had shrunk back to the ground suddenly raised its head and stood up from the ground. It seemed to have sensed something. It stared at the approaching Lu Qin and suddenly growled in a low voice. The growl contained an indescribable fierceness. Yi was startled and could not help but take a few steps to the side. You're crazy again?" Yi stared at the abominable big dog and shouted. She deliberately raised her voice so that the black-robed priest could hear her and scold the stupid dog like before. Because every time this happened, Atsu would behave for a while, and Yi could sleep peacefully for at least 2 days. Unexpectedly, after Lu Qin walked over, he did not have the slightest intention of scolding Atsu. Instead, he looked down at Atsu and reached out his hand to gently touch Atsu's head. Atsu bared its fangs and looked ferocious as if it was about to eat someone. Yi clenched her fists nervously. She thought to herself, "If you have the guts, bite this priest to death and then eat him, I'll consider you a capable person. You want to go with me?" It was Lu Qin who asked Atsu in a low voice. Atsu wagged its tail and stood beside his feet. Lu Qin smiled, nodded and walked out of the door. Yi was at a loss for a moment, unsure if she should follow. But before Lu Qin walked out, he suddenly turned back and said to her, "Go call the Black Fire Guards and ask them to go to the Firerock leader's side." Yi was stunned for a moment, then nodded and said, "Okay, I'll ask the group outside to go." There were a total of 20 Black Fire Guards trained by Lu Qin. These days they were divided into 4 shifts and took turns to guard outside the house. There were 3 shifts a day and each shift was 4 hours long. At the moment there were 5 people guarding outside the house, so Yi asked this question. Unexpectedly, after a moment of silence, Lu Qin shook his head and said, "No, call all of them." Yi's body trembled slightly, and a look of shock appeared on her face. Lu Qin looked at her calmly and did not speak. After a while Yi seemed to wake up from a dream and hurriedly said, Yes, I'll go now." As she spoke, she quickly ran out of the stone house. When the sunlight outside fell on her, she didn't know why, but she didn't feel any warmth. She only felt a faint chill enveloping her body, causing her to subconsciously shiver. Chapter 332. Lu Qin walked slowly through the Black Fire Tribe's camp. Along the way he often saw people from the Black Fire Tribe coming and going. The Black Fire Barbarians also saw Lu Qin, but perhaps out of awe or disgust, no one dared to approach him, let alone take the initiative to greet Lu Qin. Lu Qin was already used to this kind of treatment. In fact, this made him feel more comfortable. If the surrounding barbarians really saw him as a real tribe priest and worshipped him infinitely, he would have a huge headache if they rushed over and kowtowed to him. Along the way the Black Fire Tribe's camp looked very peaceful. Everywhere he looked, the Black Fire Tribe members were also very normal. But as he walked towards Hui Yan's residence, Lu Qin still quietly took out the Vulcan staff and held it in his hand. It was normal for a priest to have a staff in his hand. Perhaps it was because he walked slowly or Yi ran quickly because she was anxious. But when Lu Qin was almost at the stone house where Hui Yan lived, 20 Black Fire Guards had already rushed over. And behind these barbarian warriors, there was a barbarian girl looking at them from afar. It was Yi. But looking at her, it seemed that she didn't want to come over. Lu Qin glanced at her but didn't mind. He even smiled at her, then turned his head to look at the Black Fire Guards. Just as Lu Qin had said before, these 20 barbarian warriors were actually Divine Wood race members who had been captured and surrendered. They had been selected by Lu Qin, and after casting black flame runes on them, he had ordered people to prepare special clothes for them. Now they could be considered as a small army that only obeyed his orders. Even Lu Qin directly told these black fire runes that could kill people. In short, they could either work for him or die. This sounded very evil, but Lu Qin did it without any hindrance. It was unknown if it was because he grew up in such a dark and sinister environment that his heart was as hard as iron, or if he saw that these were all barbarians and had no compassion for them. As for what he was thinking in his heart, only he himself knew. In front of this mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest, the 20 black fire guards were all expressionless. After all, their lives were in someone else's hands and no one would have a good expression. Lu Qin didn't care about this either. After all, he only wanted the power of these people to die for him. When he whispered some instructions to the black fire guards, and then turned to walk towards the Firerock house, Lu Qin suddenly thought of the time when he was still in the Kunlun Mountains in the north. At that time, although the days in the Kunlun party were a little boring looking at it now, how could it not be a little warm? Moreover, there was still that young girl who loved to smile most of the time. Even recalling her seemed to warm his heart. He shook his head and collected his thoughts. Then he looked at the door of the stone house and saw the Fire Hawk standing there. Apart from him, there were 2 other tall Black Fire Tribe warriors standing behind him. Lu Qin quietly looked at Hou Yan. His gaze was calm, but it could not be said to be gentle. However, Hou Yan seemed to be a bold and courageous youth of the barbarian tribe. Not only was he not afraid of the black-robed priest like the other barbarians, he even sneered and stared at Lu Qin without any intention of retreating. Lu Qin walked over and said, "Why are you here?" The Fire Hawk snorted, but then he seemed to have thought of something and suppressed his temper. He said, "My grandfather and father are waiting for you inside. They have something to discuss with you." "Okay." Lu Qin replied as if he did not suspect anything. He then walked towards the stone house. However, at this moment Hou Yan suddenly stretched out his hand and stopped him. He said, "Wait a moment." Lu Qin's footsteps paused. He asked, "What is it?" Hou Yan expressionlessly said, "My grandfather just said that only the 3 of you can enter. At the same time, in order to be on guard, no one is allowed to bring weapons inside." Weapons? Lu Qin seemed to understand after thinking for a while. He raised the fire god's staff in his hand slightly and said, "Are you talking about this fire god's staff?" Hou Yan was just about to speak when he suddenly heard a ferocious roar from the side. It was the giant black wolf beside Lu Qin. It suddenly walked out from behind him and bared its teeth, staring fiercely at Hou Yan as if it was about to pounce on him. Hou Yan's heart turned cold. Previously he had been pounced on by this giant wolf once. To be honest, that time he was quite frightened. At this moment he subconsciously took 2 steps back, but he immediately realized that he was a little embarrassed. He said angrily, "Lu Qin, aren't you going to take care of this demonic wolf?" Lu Qin waved his hand, and Atsu's ferocious aura retracted slightly. Hou Yan heaved a sigh of relief, but his face darkened as he said to Lu Qin, "Leave the fire god's staff here and go in yourself." Lu Qin glanced at him indifferently but shook his head. Then, without saying a word, he prepared to walk into the house again. Hou Yan was immediately enraged. He had been the pride of the tribe since he was young, and everyone knew that he was the candidate for the future patriarch. For the sake of Hua Hu and Hou Yan, everyone would give in to him. Even adult warriors would be extremely polite when they spoke to him, and no one had ever looked down on him so openly. Therefore Hou Yan exploded with the same impulse as before. Of course, it was also possible that he had other thoughts. He suddenly rushed in front of Lu Qin and blocked his path. He said angrily, "Leave the fire god's staff behind before you can go in." Lu Qin looked at him and said, "What if I don't want to stay?" Hou Yan sneered, "Then don't even think about going in." Lu Qin thought for a moment, then said with an "Oh, all right, then I won't go in." With that he turned around and left. Hou Yan's original sneer instantly froze on his face as if it had frozen. He opened his mouth in shock, but at this moment he didn't know what to do. What are you doing?" he stammered as he shouted at Lu Qin's back. At the same time, his voice was filled with disbelief and indescribable anger as he shouted, "Our tribe's leader and leader are waiting for you. How dare you ignore them?" His voice was so loud that even the people far away could hear him. Everyone looked over. At the same time, from the stone house behind him, an old sigh could be faintly heard. There seemed to be a hint of helplessness in that voice. Until the end, Lu Qin still did not follow Hou Yan's orders. He put down the fire god's staff and entered the stone house to pay his respects to the tribe leader. To this black-robed priest, he didn't seem to care about anything other than the power in his hands that he would never let go. Before he left, he told Hou Yan, who was almost in a state of rage, that if there was anything else, he could ask his grandfather and father to go to the priest's stone house to find him. These words made Huaying fly into a rage. The shame of being humiliated in front of him and failing to complete his mission made this barbarian youth bristle with anger. He roared for his men to capture Lu Qin, but very quickly reality taught him another lesson. The 20 black fire guards blocked the way in silence. But under the gloomy gazes of these people, the warriors behind Huaying didn't dare to rush over. They even grabbed Huaying tightly so that the angry youth wouldn't lose control and rush to his death. This was what happened in the Black Fire Tribe's camp. But it was the Black Fire Guards who had been captured by the Divine Tree who had suppressed the young chief of the Black Fire Tribe. This was, of course, a major event that shook the entire tribe. So very quickly warriors of the Black Fire Tribe rushed over from all directions. The atmosphere in the camp suddenly became tense. Some people began to appear around the priest's stone house intentionally or unintentionally. Some warriors slowly approached and surrounded the stone house. But inside the stone house, everything seemed to be very calm. Yi had also returned. After seeing the confrontation just now, her heart was beating very fast. She had many questions to ask this black-robed priest, but she didn't dare to speak. But after a while, a question suddenly came from the dark shadows. How many days has it been since you last saw the Fyrock chief? Chapter 333. Fyrock Chief. Yi was startled for a moment. After thinking carefully for a while, a trace of doubt flashed across his face. I didn't pay much attention. Lu Qin said, don't you usually walk around the camp doing things? Could it be that you haven't seen him even once in so many days? Yi frowned again and said thoughtfully, now that you mention it, it seems that I really haven't seen the Fyrock Chief for a few days. Lu Qin lowered his head in thought. After a moment he said to himself, is there really such a coincidence? We're going to battle in 2 days? Yi didn't hear clearly and asked, Sir, what did you say? Lu Qin was silent and no longer spoke. He just sat in the dim shadows of the house, as if he had merged with the surrounding darkness. Fire Falcon, who had been humiliated and belittled by Lu Qin in public during the day, did not rush over to fight Lu Qin as he had said when he flew into a rage. It was unknown whether his anger had subsided or he had been dissuaded. But for Fire Falcon, who had always been proud and arrogant, this should be a great humiliation. Before the sky turned dark, Lu Qin summoned the 20 black fire guards. In the end, as usual, only 5 of them were left on duty, while the other 15 were dismissed to rest. But before they left, Lu Qin called them to the dark stone house and spoke for a while. Outsiders couldn't hear or see what the black-robed priest had said to these people, but when the black fire guards left the stone house, they found that their expressions were slightly solemn. This scene was secretly seen by someone, and it didn't take long for the news to reach the most powerful people in the Black Fire Tribe. Fire Falcon was accompanying his grandfather, Fire Tiger, as usual. He sent all the Black Fire Guards back? After listening, Fire Falcon was the first to ask, and even his voice rose a few octaves. The one who spoke in front of him was Qi Shi. The one who had been sent to secretly monitor the situation in the black-robed priest's stone house was his subordinate. In the Black Fire Tribe, the strongest and bravest barbarian warriors were naturally the group that had gone to the Sacred Wood Tribe last time. But these Black Fire warriors mostly trusted Fire Rock, and secondly they already had the Black Fire runes cast by Lu Qin on them. They were warriors with demonic abilities, so it was hard to guarantee which side they would side with. So in this situation, the few senior elders of the Black Fire Tribe played a big role. They all had subordinates, and although they couldn't compare to the most valiant warriors, they were still a force not to be underestimated. At this moment, Scarlet Rhino smiled at the Fire Hawk and said, Indeed. It seems that Lu Qin only came to show off his might during the day. When he went back he saw that no one dared to provoke him. Fire Falcon fiercely gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, This person insulted me during the day, I won't rest until he's dead. Qi Shi smiled but didn't say anything. White Eagle walked to Fire Tiger, who was resting with his eyes closed, and said, Patriarch, it's time to make a decision. Fire Tiger slowly opened his eyes and looked at White Eagle. White Eagle said, It's best to end this quickly. That Lu Qin is the tribe's priest. Although he can't completely convince everyone, it's not appropriate to kill him in public. It's best to take advantage of the dead of the night to catch this person and his henchmen in one fell swoop. If it's the Sacred Wood Tribe's survivors, then our Black Fire Tribe will have a bright future. At that time, even if it's daybreak and the other tribesmen find out, with you there to hold the fort, and a few more crimes will be thrown on his head. Naturally, everything will be peaceful." Fire Tiger was silent for a long time. He didn't agree, but he didn't refuse either. When everyone's gazes gathered on him, this old patriarch slowly stood up and walked towards a wall on the other side of the room without saying a word. When he walked to the side of the wall, he reached out and touched an inconspicuous place on the cabinet. There was a rumbling sound and a secret door opened. Then, Fire Tiger walked in alone, and a moment later the secret door closed again. There was silence in the room. Everyone looked at each other. Chi-Shi was the most impatient and asked White Eagle, "Patriarch, what's wrong with him? He won't be getting cold feet, right?" White Eagle pondered for a moment, then shook his head and said, "He won't, don't worry." After Fire Tiger walked into the secret room, his eyes swept around. He saw that the room was dim, and there was no furniture, only a sturdy stone chair connected to the ground in the middle of the secret room in front of him. A burly man was tied to the chair. With the dim light it could be seen that the man was Huoyan. This burly and strong barbarian leader was tightly tied to the stone chair with ropes. Apart from his head, his body couldn't move at all. There were many wounds and bloodstains on his head and face. It was obvious that he had experienced a fierce battle before he was tied to this place. At this moment, perhaps because he heard the footsteps, Huoyan, who had his head lowered, looked up. In the dim secret room, the father and son looked at each other silently. But in their eyes, there seemed to be faint sparks flashing. After an unknown amount of time, Fire Tiger shook his head and slowly walked to Huoyan's side. Then he calmly sat on the ground next to him. A shadow enveloped the father and son, and the sky outside looked like it was about to turn dark. "Father, must you do this?" Huoyan's voice sounded in the secret room. It was low and slightly suppressed, and there was a faint trace of exhaustion in his voice. Fire Tiger's expression was indifferent. After a moment he said, "You forced me to do this." Huoyan sneered but didn't say anything. Fire Tiger waited for a moment, then continued, "I know you hate me in your heart, but have you ever thought about it? I raised you from a young age and nurtured you bit by bit. Everyone in the tribe knows that after I die, the position of tribe leader will be passed on to you. I've already done this much, what else do you want me to do?" Huoyan said, "I don't want you to do anything as long as you watch from the side, father. Everything I do is for the Black Fire tribe. I will make the Black Fire tribe strong again and restore the glory of our ancestors. You will make the Black Fire tribe fall into eternal damnation." Fire Tiger suddenly shouted, interrupting his son's words. Huoyan glanced at him, then sneered and shook his head without saying anything. Fire Tiger took 2 deep breaths and calmed down a little. Then he said, "That man called Lu Qin of the human race is definitely not an emissary of the fire god. He is a demon, a spy sent by the human race. You have been completely deceived by him." Huoyan lightly said, "He has the power of the black fire in his body." Fire Tiger shook his head, "That is just him pretending to be mysterious. The fire god will never pass his power to anyone outside of our Black Fire tribe." Huoyan stared at his father for a long time, then suddenly sighed and turned his head away, no longer saying anything. Fire Tiger didn't seem to care about his son's actions. He only looked at him calmly and said, "Son, I will give you one last chance. As long as you come with us tonight to capture that Lu Chen and then kill that monster with your own hands in front of everyone, then the past will be written off. Everything will be the same as before, you will still be the same, and the position of tribe leader will still be yours." Huoyan's expression twisted for a moment, as if he was struggling in his heart. But very quickly, his expression slowly became firm, and he heavily shook his head. Fire Tiger stood up and stared at his most outstanding son, whom he had high hopes for many years. His eyes were filled with disappointment and he said in a low voice, "Why are you so stubborn? What kind of sorcery did that Lu Chen cast on you to make you become like this?" Huoyan was silent for a moment, then said, "Father, the ones in the wrong are you all, not me." Fire Tiger stared at him for a long time, then finally let out a long sigh, as if he had finally given up. He turned around and slowly walked towards the door of the secret room. Just as he reached out to open the door, his body paused for a moment, but he didn't turn around. Instead, as if he was giving his final instructions, he lightly said, "You will spend your last night here. But don't worry, I will properly train Fire Eagle. In the future he will definitely become an even more outstanding tribe leader than you." As he finished speaking he walked out. The secret door to the secret room closed behind him. Instantly, darkness rushed in from all directions, enveloping Huoyan in a black shadow. Huoyan looked up in the darkness, only to see that the sky outside the crack had finally turned completely dark. The corner of his mouth slowly revealed a cold smile, with a hint of mockery and disappointment. Night had come. Chapter 334. Deep into the night, the Black Fire Tribe's camp was silent. Darkness shrouded the land and the cold wind whistled past. There were also dark clouds in the night sky, and apart from a few torches around the camp, there was almost no other light. To survive in this harsh wasteland, the Black Fire Tribe naturally couldn't be in a relaxed state. Even in the middle of the night, there were people standing guard around the camp. The guards vigilantly watched the seemingly endless wasteland around the camp. Although the sky was too dark to see too far, they still used the torches to illuminate the nearby areas. They were still on guard against dangerous monsters that might appear at night, or unpredictable dangers that came from the depths of the darkness. For example, in the past, the Black Fire Tribe and the Divine Wood Tribe had both been ambushed. Apart from the sentries that were set up around the camp, there would usually be one or two groups of barbarian warriors patrolling the interior of the camp. However, in this dark and windy night, there were no changes to the sentries around the camp. Only the sentries that were supposed to be patrolling the interior of the camp had disappeared. The people who arranged and dispatched these things were naturally the few influential figures of the Black Fire Tribe. However, in the middle of the night, these few influential figures of the tribe didn't go to sleep as usual. Instead, they were gathered in a dark corner of the tribe. About 20 to 30 feet in front of them, there was a remote and somewhat lonely stone house. Occasionally, one or two figures could be seen walking around the stone house. In the darkness, Flaming Tiger, White Eagle, Scarlet Rhino and the others all stood together with solemn expressions. Firehawk also stood beside his grandfather, but perhaps because of his youth, he still couldn't be as calm as these elders. His childish face was filled with excitement and nervousness, and his hands were tightly clenched into fists, even slightly trembling. Behind them, in the dark shadows, there were dozens of silent figures lurking there. The cold glint of their weapons could be faintly seen, and a murderous aura could be felt. "Are you sure there are only 5 Black Fire Guards outside the house?" Chief Flaming Tiger's voice rang out in the darkness as he asked Scarlet Rhino. Scarlet Rhino nodded and said with certainty, "Yes, there are only 5 of them. The other 15 have already returned to the Divine Wood Tribe's residence." Flaming Tiger was silent for a moment. He turned his gaze to the back and glanced at the warriors hidden in the shadows. Then his gaze landed on the White Eagle. White Eagle immediately said, "Don't worry, Patriarch. These warriors are the younger generation of us old men. Although they may not be as good as Iron Bear, Black Ox and the others, they have no problem fighting. The most important thing is that they are obedient." Fire Tiger silently nodded his head. He coldly snorted and said, "If it weren't for the fact that Huoyan brainwashed the young warriors of my clan, causing them to worship that human priest, I would have killed this scourge myself." Hearing this, White Eagle only smiled and said, "Patriarch, there's no need to worry. All the fault lies with that human Luchin. As long as he's killed, you can make a public announcement, and those young warriors will naturally come to their senses." Flaming Tiger nodded. It seemed that he agreed with White Eagle's words. He then took a deep breath and said, "Then let's begin." White Eagle turned around and looked at Scarlet Rhino. They then nodded at the same time and suddenly waved their hands towards the darkness. Whoosh! A low but intimidating roar suddenly sounded. Dozens of figures stood up at the same time, their weapons flashing with cold light. Then, under the cover of the darkness, they began to rush towards the lonely stone house. The night wind whistled, seeming to bring with it a bone-chilling cold. When it blew against people's faces, they could not help but shiver. Flaming Tiger seemed to be a little uneasy. He turned to White Eagle and said, "I heard that those Black Fire Guards have been enchanted by Luchin. They can enter the demonification state and their combat strength will soar several times. Can we defeat them?" White Eagle said seriously, "Patriarch, don't worry. I've already thought about this. Although the demonification state is very powerful, it is not a big deal. First, in order to enter the demonification state, the human priest must be the one to cast the spell. But now that it is late at night, that Luchin must be asleep. He might be sleeping with that maid called Yi in his arms right now." At this point, the old men beside him all revealed a somewhat sinister and wretched smile. Flaming Tiger also nodded. Only Fire Eagle was startled. He interrupted White Eagle and asked, "Grandpa White Eagle, that is just a woman that the Divine Wood race captured and gave to Luchin. How do you know her name? The white condor paused for a moment as he stared at the firehawk's face. A light flashed in his eyes before he shook his head and smiled at the firehawk. Silly child, I've long hated that human. Since we're going to deal with him, we naturally have to figure out everything, don't you think? Crimson Rhinoceros laughed and said, yes, that makes sense. But Brother White Eagle, you are very careful. I didn't think of this. Ah. White Condor smiled and ignored them. He said to Fire Tiger, secondly, the number of black fire guards is still small. We can take advantage of the night to launch a surprise attack and kill fewer people. No matter what, we will still win. As long as we kill that Lu Qin, the situation will be settled. Fire Tiger nodded. It seemed that he agreed with White Eagle's words. White Eagle glanced at his expression and said, then let's go and take a look. Everyone looked towards the stone house. They saw that there was a sudden cry of alarm and fighting in the eyes of the Black Shadow. Then, a large number of figures twisted frantically. Cold wind whistled among the sword light and sword shadows, but there was a smell of blood drifting with the wind. Everyone present had walked through mountains of blades and seas of blood in the wilderness. They were very familiar with the smell of blood. White Eagle clapped his hands and said with a smile, it seems that it is going more smoothly than we thought. Patriarch, let's go quickly. Fire Tiger was also relieved. He laughed and said, okay. With that, the group of people strode towards the stone house. The darkness of the night was like a rolling tide, incessantly boiling. Further away, in the camp of the Black Fire tribe, there were obviously people who were awakened by the commotion here, and there was a commotion in the pitch-black night. Perhaps it was because of the murderous atmosphere, or perhaps it was because someone was obstructing them, but the commotion and cries of alarm were quickly suppressed. At most, there were only a few insensible cries of children that reverberated far away in the dark night with a hint of mournfulness. The crowd was still moving forward. Everyone looked very happy and excited. They were all looking forward to seeing a bloody feast. But halfway through, someone frowned, feeling that something was wrong. That was because the sounds of fighting still hadn't stopped even now. There were still flashes of cold light in the darkness ahead, and at the same time, there were stifled roars. That was the result of telling these young warriors to keep quiet and not make any noise. Closer, closer. Everyone subconsciously quickened their pace. As they neared the dark stone house, Flaming Tiger and the group of elders finally saw the situation in front of the stone house clearly with the help of the faint glimmer of light that shone nearby. Dozens of young barbarians gathered at the entrance of the stone house. However, they couldn't rush in at the moment. This was because there were 4 or 5 figures blocking the entrance of the stone house. They were relying on the narrow space to resist the surging attack. Although they had the advantage of the terrain, to be able to resist the siege of so many people, one could imagine that the battle strength of the people in the sect was not to be underestimated. Using the faint light to take a closer look, everyone immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. They saw that the muscles of the barbarians in the house were bulging, as if they were about to burst. Their bodies seemed to have swelled up and they looked like demons and ghosts. It was the appearance of demons. Without a sound, without any warning, these black fire guards had suddenly entered a state of demons, and then blocked everyone at the door. Fire Tiger's heart suddenly sank, and a wave of unease swept through his heart. He stopped and was about to turn to ask White Eagle, but suddenly, his heart turned cold. It was a coldness that penetrated his heart and lungs. Because, there was a blade that was as cold as ice that pierced through his back, and then mercilessly, with a trace of cruel aura, directly pierced through his old chest. His entire chest and body instantly turned cold. Fire Tiger's body suddenly swayed, and then he turned his head to look. In that instant he felt as if everything around him had suddenly slowed down. Qi Shi and the other elders were still nervously looking in the direction of the stone house. Only his grandson, Fire Eagle, who was standing close to him, seemed to sense something and turned his head to look. At the same time, a trace of fear appeared on his face. Another figure silently appeared behind him, moved his hand away from the hilt of the blade, and then smiled at him slightly apologetically. The night wind whistled past, and the white hair on that person's head became somewhat messy. Behind him, a black shadow was silently stepping out of the darkness. It was such a familiar, abnormally tall figure. It was as if the sky was filled with darkness, and this old barbarian was drowning in it. Chapter 335. Qi Shi. All of a sudden, an incomparably mournful shout that seemed to tear one's throat resounded through the entire area, suppressing all the sounds of weapons clashing. For a moment, everyone was shocked and turned their heads to look. Behind the crowd, the old chief of the Black Fire tribe Jianghu had his chest pierced by a sharp blade. Blood gushed out like a fountain, and in the blink of an eye, half of his body was already dyed red. White Eagle, who was standing behind him, hugged his body. His face was full of anger, and he pointed a blood-stained finger at Qixi, who was standing on the other side of Jianghu, who seemed to be at a loss, and roared, "Why did you assassinate the chief?" Qixi's face was full of shock, and he subconsciously shook his head, saying, No, I didn't." Before he finished speaking, his eyes suddenly widened, and the elders standing around him also sucked in a breath of cold air. Because at this moment, they saw a shadow walking out from the depths of the darkness behind Jianghu and White Eagle, who were already on the verge of death. That tall and burly figure slowly walked over. Someone lit a torch, illuminating his face. It was Huoyan. There were still wounds on his face and bloodstains all over his body. He was a mess, but he carried a dignified murderous aura, like a tide surging out from his figure. And behind Huoyan, more black shadows slowly walked out. They were all expressionless barbarian warriors, and walking at the very front were Tai Xiong Hanyo and the others. They were far more mature and powerful than the youths fighting in front of them, and even their gazes seemed colder. Silently, the group of people who had walked out from the darkness had already surrounded everyone here. It was unknown when it started, but suddenly, everything quieted down. There was no longer anyone fighting and no one shouting. Everyone looked around blankly, and then there was the sound of heavy and nervous breathing. "Qixi, the chief has always treated you like a brother for so many years. How could you collude with others and kill him so cruelly?" White Eagle was full of grief and indignation, roaring at Qixi. At the same time, his tiger eyes were filled with tears, and his emotions were extremely agitated. Qixi's face flushed red and he roared, "It wasn't me, don't slander me." As he spoke, he looked around and roared, "You all saw it just now, right? I've been standing here the whole time and didn't do anything. Quickly testify for me." The few tribal elders by the side were also in a state of shock, especially when they saw Huoyan leading a large group of warriors to surround them. They faintly sensed something, and quite a few of them turned as pale as paper. Their bodies were also faintly trembling, and for a moment, no one went to answer Qixi's question. However, at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded out from beside the White Eagle. It was the Fire Eagle, who had been standing beside the Fire Tiger and seemed to be in a daze. The Fire Eagle suddenly said, "No, he didn't kill him. I saw it, it was you." He raised his hand and there was a flame of anger in his eyes. His young face seemed to be slightly distorted from the heat. Just as his finger was about to point at someone, his voice was suddenly cut off. His hand also seemed to have frozen in midair as if it had turned into stone. A dark and tall shadow appeared behind him, silent and austere, as if it had covered up all the warmth of the past. A thick and coarse palm landed on the back of the Firehawk's neck. It was like a lion on the wasteland, using its sharp teeth to bite its child's neck. It was a familiar hand in his memory. He had touched it many times over the years. When he was still a young child, these hands had once hugged him. Perhaps that warmth had long since faded, but at this moment, it seemed to surge into his heart again. However, at this moment, that hand no longer had the warmth it once had. It was as cold as a knife, and all the words in the Fire Eagle's mouth were frozen back into his throat. The Fire Eagle raised his head in confusion, and what he saw was the familiar face of his father, Huoyan, that fierce, cold and scarred face with a trace of disappointment in his eyes. Huoyan quietly looked at his son. Not long ago he had seen with his own eyes the two closest relatives in this world, in this tribe, work together to harm him. He did not do anything to the Fire Eagle and only looked at him. After a while, he said softly, "You think you can be the chief with this appearance?" The Fire Eagle's body began to tremble uncontrollably, and his face turned pale without a trace of blood. At the same time, in a place further away with so many warriors gathered here, the huge commotion could no longer be suppressed. Lights lit up in the Black Fire tribe, and an unknown number of people were gathering here. The commotion came wave after wave. However, at the very center of the crowd, Huoyan was still holding his son's neck, and it seemed that they were very close. He indifferently said to the Fire Eagle, "Say it again loudly. Who killed Grandpa?" The Fire Eagle's body trembled and he looked around. He found that Qixi and the other elders as well as the young warriors of the tribe were surrounded by the most powerful warriors of the Black Fire tribe. The murderous intent was so thick that it seemed like it was about to explode. The hand behind his neck seemed to tighten a little. The fire eagle's entire body trembled, and he suddenly let out a loud cry, as if he could no longer endure this terrifying pressure. He gasped for breath and cried, pointing at Qi and the others, and shouted, it's them, I saw it with my own eyes, it's them who killed Grandpa." Everyone in the Black Fire tribe was in an uproar. White Condor, who was originally a little nervous, let out a long sigh of relief. He silently took a few steps back and stood behind Hoi Yan's burly body. He looked as if he wanted to hide himself in the darkness. Hoi Yan expressionlessly looked at the group of people who were surrounded in the middle. At this moment, they had already become completely terrified and did not know what to do. Then, with the last shred of cold indifference, he waved his hand and slashed towards them. As the hand fell, a strange and distant voice suddenly rang out in the dark sky above the crowd. It sounded as if an ancient god was reciting an incantation from the vault of heaven. The power of darkness descended from the sky and turned into streaks of black light that sank into the bodies of the strongest barbarian warriors in the crowd. Roar! Waves of roars came from the mouths of many brute race warriors. They stepped forward, their clothes torn, and the muscles of their bodies twisted and bulged. It was as if there was an unimaginable and terrifying power flowing and exploding in their bodies, turning them from ordinary brute race warriors into violent killing machines. Demonization. The people looked up and saw that in the depths of the darkness, there seemed to be a black figure hidden in a place where the naked eye could not see, coldly watching the battle that had just taken place. The darkness was like a tide, crazily surging forward. Screams, shouts, and tragic howls instantly mixed together. In the darkness, blood suddenly splashed, like a rare blood-red acacia flower in the wilderness. There was not much suspense in the outcome of this battle. In fact, this could not even be considered a battle. In front of the powerful brute race warriors who had entered demonization, the young men who had obeyed the tribal elders had almost no ability to resist. What welcomed them was a massacre that cut off their lives. Yes, it was a complete massacre. Apart from White Eagle, the other 5 tribal elders and all the young men who had participated in this matter, who were actually the family members of the 5 elders, were all killed on the spot. That night, blood splattered all over the Black Fire tribe's camp. Some special people who were watching from afar were frightened, and at the same time, they were reminded of the night that their tribe was destroyed not long ago. It was actually so similar. After 1,000 years of dormancy, the Black Fire tribe had suddenly become incomprehensible to everyone. Not only were they cruel and merciless to their enemies, but they were also incomparably bloodthirsty to their own people. That night, the Black Fire tribe underwent a shocking change. The Red Rhino tribe and the other 5 elders of the tribe led a rebellion, plotting to seize the position of the tribe leader, and plotting to kill the tribe leader, Huahu. The tribal warrior leader, Hoi Yan, was not afraid in the face of danger. He led the warriors loyal to the tribe to resist bravely and turn the tide. Finally, the crisis was reversed and all the traitors were killed. Then, under the agitation of the crowd, many Black Fire tribe warriors captured the remaining members of the 5th elder's family and slaughtered them all. At dawn, Hoi Yan stopped the crowd and cried in front of his father's corpse. Then, surrounded by the crowd, he officially ascended to the position of tribe leader. Chapter 336. After the hubbub, the entire Black Fire tribe welcomed another dynasty-changing ceremony in great shock. In the tribes of the wilderness, the ceremony of a chief ascending to the throne was one of the most solemn ceremonies. But on this day the new chief, Hoi Yan, who had just lost his father, Huahu, ordered that the ceremony be carried out in the simplest way. He said that it was not suitable for a grand ceremony. The tribe's camp was still bleeding, and those who had already died on the ground were people that everyone knew the day before. They were clansmen that they could greet when walking on the road. The air was filled with a solemn and austere atmosphere, and no one was in the mood to carry out the ceremony. Moreover, Hoi Yan did not need this ceremony. This was never what he wanted. That day, when the cremation for his dead father was held, he stood by the fire and stared at the raging flames that engulfed his father's body. From beginning to end he did not say a word. And standing beside Hoi Yan, Huang, the barbarian youth who had inherited the bloodline of Huahu and Hoi Yan, seemed to be unusually emotional. He cried loudly in front of the fire, his body trembling incessantly. In the end he even knelt on the ground, desperately pounding the ground with his hands. His mouth was sobbing as if he wanted to say something, but he did not say it aloud. The man who stood beside him, as tall as a mountain, seemed to block out all the light, leaving only a dark shadow for him. He was so desperate that he could not breathe, so afraid that he did not dare to speak. When the ceremony ended that day, when Huahu had already turned into ashes and his soul had returned to the arms of the gods, everyone had already dispersed. Only the father and son were left in front of the fire. Huoyan turned his head to look at his son, his face indifferent. Deep in his eyes, a trace of pain flashed, but it was only a flash and no one would see it again. Then he turned and left, not saying another word to his son. When the tall figure had gone far away, Huoyan seemed to finally let out a sigh of relief, his whole body almost going limp on the ground. He stared blankly at the burnt-out fire, then stood up with difficulty, wanting to leave. But at this time 2 figures suddenly walked over from the side. They were strong and fierce. They were Tai Xiong and Han Yo. The fire hawk was startled and raised his head to look at the 2 of them. Tai Xiong and the black bull looked at each other. There was a trace of embarrassment and pity in their eyes. However, most of the barbarian warriors in the wasteland wouldn't feel too conflicted. Therefore, Tai Xiong quickly said to the fire hawk, "Fire hawk, the chief has asked us to escort you to a place. Protection." The fire falcon smiled bitterly and muttered, "Yes, protection. Let's go," the black yak said in a low voice as he stepped aside. The fire hawk silently walked over. Accompanied by these 2 warriors of the same clan, he walked in the other direction of the tribe. "I still underestimated you." In the dark priest's stone house, there was only Lu Qin and Huoyan sitting on the ground. Other than them there was no one else. The huge, lazy black wolf Atsu was lying at the door drowsily, blocking the prying eyes of all outsiders. The 2 of them didn't sit properly. In fact, they could be said to be sitting on the ground next to the wall without any elegance. They leaned against the wall, then stretched out their legs and crossed their arms, looking at the gradually darkening sky outside the distant window. After a moment of silence, Huoyan said, "How did you underestimate me?" Lu Qin said, "I originally thought you wouldn't be so ruthless." Huoyan smiled, but there was not the slightest hint of joy on his face. His smile looked uglier than crying and more ferocious than a roar. With some self-deprecation, he raised his right hand and waved it in front of his eyes. Then he said in a low voice, "This hand shouldn't be stained with blood yet." Lu Qin glanced at him indifferently and said, "If you want to make yourself feel better, you can think of it this way. Later on, find an opportunity to get rid of the person who did this. Then everything will naturally be at ease." Huoyan put down his hand and stared at Lu Qin. His eyes seemed to be somewhat cold as he said, "Will you believe this kind of thing yourself? Are you lying to yourself like this?" Lu Qin closed his eyes slightly. After a moment he said, "You can. You only need to tell yourself that it's right and then believe in this way of thinking. That's all." His expression and gaze seemed to drift about, as if he was thinking of the past. Then he said, "Sometimes if you don't do this, it will be very difficult for you to survive." Huoyan looked deeply at the black-robed priest. He felt that there were many unknown secrets hidden under the priest's calm expression. However, on this day he was not in the mood to find out. So he only remained silent. After a while, Huoyan suddenly took out something from his bosom, played with it a few times and then threw it to Lu Qin. Lu Qin stretched out his hand to catch it. He found that it was a black stone. Back then, in the Black Stone Canyon where the fire god altar was located, there were many such stones. However, in other places it was very rare. Huoyan looked at him and said, "I'm a little curious. Why do you seem to be able to predict the future? When we left the fire god altar, you made an agreement with me to use the black stone as a signal to hang outside the door. Could it be that you already knew that there would be such an intense conflict between me and father?" Lu Qin used his hand to gently stroke the black stone. He shook his head and said, "I don't know. It's just that when I was at the northern side of the human race, I always heard and saw many such scenes. I thought that it's better to be prepared. It's better that it's useless. However, I didn't expect that you barbarians are the same as us humans. You also like internal strife." Huoyan sighed and didn't say anything. Lu Qin said, "Now there's basically no one in the Black Fire tribe that can contend against you. The old fogies, both in the open and in the dark, have all been caught in one fell swoop. What do you plan to do next?" Huoyan snorted and said, "I've already come this far, what else can I do? You and I just need to continue." He looked up at the sky, a faint trace of excitement and hope appearing in the depths of his eyes. He said in a low voice, "This is all for the glory of the fire god, to restore the supreme glory of our Black Fire tribe ancestors. One day when I succeed, when I see our ancestors' spirits again, I can loudly boast about what I've done. Lu Qin stared at him. After a while he nodded and said, "You're right. In any case, other than thinking like this, other than walking this path to the end, wasn't there no other choice for the time being? Thunder Lizard, Ghost Fox and Mountain Spirit Tribe. You can choose one of the remaining three." Just as Huiyan stood up and prepared to leave, Lu Qin also stood up and called out to him before asking this question. Huiyan pondered for a while and said, "Let me go back and think about this carefully. The three tribes have their own advantages and disadvantages. I'll give you an answer tomorrow." Lu Qin nodded and said, "All right." Huiyan asked again, "But is there a need to be in such a hurry?" Lu Qin said indifferently, "Perhaps not at first, but now that such a big event has happened in the Black Fire tribe, a new battle is enough to divert the attention of everyone in the tribe. It can also make them formally and completely acknowledge your position. You need a victory that exterminates the tribe," Lu Qin said very seriously to Huiyan. Huiyan was silent for a while, then nodded and said, "You're right." With that he turned and walked towards the door. However, when he passed by Atsu who was lying on the ground, he suddenly stopped and looked around. He said, "This stone house is dim and narrow. It doesn't suit your status." Lu Qin smiled and said, "You know I don't care about this." Huiyan's expression was solemn. He said, "As long as we can eliminate the four tribes and unify the north, then go south to the wilderness and revive our Black Fire tribe, I will build you a shrine that has never existed in the wilderness. That is the glory you deserve." Lu Qin laughed and waved his hand. Then Huiyan also laughed. The two men smiled at each other, then turned and walked in different directions. In the sky outside the house, the darkness of the night once again descended upon this ill-fated tribe. Chapter 337. Before the break of dawn, the sky was as dark as ink. Only the mournful cold wind whistled across the vast and desolate wasteland. Between heaven and earth, there was an austere atmosphere. Under the sky, the Black Fire tribe's camp was shrouded in darkness. Everywhere was quiet. Perhaps the wind was too cold, or perhaps the cold air of the tribe made people feel solemn. At this moment, three figures appeared in the wild grass some distance away from the Black Fire camp. They were Tai Xiong Heinyo and their guard, Firehawk. The cold wind blew across their bodies. Tai Xiong and Heinyo looked as if they were made of iron. They were expressionless. Only when their gazes occasionally swept past Firehawk and looked at this young boy would a strange expression flash across the depths of their eyes. There was regret, pity and also a hint of sorrow. Thinking back to the days of the past, even though there were flashes of blades and shadows of swords, and there were also bloody battles, it gave people a sense of tranquility for some reason. It was as if the days of the past were so peaceful in their memories, so peaceful that they didn't know how many years had passed. It was a kind of time that seemed to have never changed since they were born. Every barbarian of the Black Fire tribe seemed to be walking on the fixed path left behind by their ancestors. They worshipped and respected their ancestors. They never doubted and they walked on with determination. Until the man called Huiyan appeared. He also worshipped their ancestors, but he wanted to break everything and change everything. In the darkness, in the cold wind, a tall and sturdy figure walked out of the darkness. The cold wrapped around him. Even the valiant barbarian warriors like Tai Xiong and Heinyo couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. For a moment, Tai Xiong and the others even felt a trace of unfamiliarity from this leader who had followed them for so many years. Or perhaps it was a trace of confusion towards the dangerous and unpredictable days ahead. Huiyan walked in front of them and stopped. The cold night wind blew past. The farthest horizon seemed to have a faint glimmer of light. But under their feet, the wasteland was still pitch black. Even at such a close distance, they could only see each other's blurry faces. Firehawk looked up at him. For some reason his body suddenly trembled. On the other hand, Huiyan remained silent. His gaze finally landed on his son. His gaze was deep, as if he wanted to see through the child's heart. Under his intense gaze, the Firehawk seemed to find it difficult to resist. It became more and more nervous, breathing faster and faster, and its body began to tremble again. Tai Xiong and Black Bull, who were standing at the side, could not bear to watch. Black Bull wanted to say something but hesitated. Tai Xiong, on the other hand, clenched his teeth and summoned his courage to speak to Huiyan in a low voice. "Patriarch, Fire Eagle is your son after all. Moreover, he is only a child. When your grandfather said to you," Huiyan suddenly interrupted Tai Xiong's words, but his gaze remained fixed on Huaying. Even his words were directed at Huaying. When your grandfather said to you that he wanted to kill me and make you the next clan leader, what did you do? Tai Xiong and Black Yak trembled at the same time. They pursed their lips and lowered their heads, not daring to say another word. After hearing his father's words, Fire Eagle's face turned ashen. His body trembled uncontrollably and he suddenly cried out, "Father, father, I didn't want to harm you. I really didn't want to harm you." With a plop, Fire Eagle had already knelt in front of Huayan. He reached out and hugged Huayan's legs, crying, "From the beginning to the end, I really didn't say a single word to harm you. Everything was instigated by Scarlet Rhino, White Eagle, and the others." His mournful cries resounded far and wide in this vast wilderness. It sounded like the cries of a young beast that was suddenly facing death, and it caused others to be unable to help but raise their eyebrows and feel pity in their hearts. However, in this silence, other than his cries, there was only the cold wind. There was no other response. This scene caused this brute race youth to seem very lonely. Huayan slowly squatted down in front of him, and then stared at his tearful son. His tone was slow and heavy, as if every word he said contained a strange emotion in his heart. "You didn't say anything and your grandfather didn't say anything, but after you heard it, you all tacitly agreed, didn't you?" When he said this, Huayan smiled. However, the expression in his smile seemed to be crying, causing his face to distort like a devil. He said in a hoarse voice, "I still remember how excited you were at that time. Were you thinking about the scene of you sitting on the position of clan leader in the future?" Huayan turned pale with fright and shook his head with all his might. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly felt his throat tighten. His entire body had been grabbed by the throat by Huayan with a single hand. After which, he let out a low roar that was like the howl of a demonic beast, and directly lifted Huayan's entire body into the air. Pain was revealed on Huayan's face. His legs flailed about, and his hands desperately tried to grab the hand on his throat. However, Huayan's hand seemed to be made of iron and did not move at all. By the side, Tai Xiong and Black Bull were shocked, and a sliver of unbearable expression appeared on their faces. However, when they saw Huayan's demon-like berserk appearance, they could roughly guess the feelings of this chief at that time. How could a person who had been betrayed, abandoned, and assassinated by his closest blood relative in the world remain calm? Huayan roared in a low voice and stared at his son, who was grabbed by his giant hand. Within his fury, there was sadness and disappointment as he hissed, why are you so anxious? Don't tell me that I will not pass this position to you in the future. Just what have I done wrong for you and father to treat me like this?" He let out a furious roar like the long roar of a lion, and his voice shook the surroundings. Then he threw Huayan away with a single hand. The young man from the brute tribe rolled for a long distance in the underbrush of the wilderness, and finally landed heavily on the ground, moaning in pain. Huayan once again took a step forward and walked towards Huayan. Black Bull and Tai Xiong looked at each other, and finally seemed to be unable to endure any longer. Black Bull took a step forward and said in a low voice, "Chief, he is your son after all, please spare him, you?" Huayan suddenly opened his mouth and interrupted Black Bull's words. His voice was as deep as the cold wind and he said, "Leave me and my son alone." Black Bull and Tai Xiong were silent, and in the end they did not dare to say anything more. They could only look at the figure that was moaning in pain from afar, and leave this place with a trace of a sigh in their hearts. They walked towards the tribe's camp in the distance, and very quickly disappeared into the darkness of the wilderness. Huayan's face was as cold as frost, and he did not turn back to look at the two loyal subordinates who had left. His gaze was always fixed on Huayan, the son that he had once placed high hopes on, and the son that he loved deeply. After a while he took a deep breath and looked up at the dark sky. The faint light of dawn was slowly rising from the edge of the horizon. Stepping into the last remnants of the darkness, he stepped forward, and walked towards Huayan. Light and shadow crisscrossed the earth, and the world of swaying shadows. Dawn was coming. Yi woke up from her sleep and after letting out a low cry, she suddenly sat up from the ground. Then she found that her surroundings were still quiet and dark, and her consciousness returned to her mind. She found that she was still in the familiar stone house, and only then did she press her hand on her chest and gasp for breath. After a long while she finally calmed down. "Did you have a nightmare?" Suddenly, a low and calm voice came from a dark corner of the house. It was Lu Chen's voice. Yi glanced in that direction and after a moment of hesitation she softly said, "Yes." Lu Chen was silent for a moment and suddenly said, A long time ago when I was still in the north, someone said that you barbarians in the south were so fierce, and how you killed without blinking an eye. But no one has ever said that you are actually like the human race, that you have so many emotions and that you also have nightmares? Yi snorted, a little unhappy in her heart, and could not help but retort. Since I was young, I have heard the elders in my tribe say the same thing about you humans. So there is nothing to say about this matter. Luchin seemed to pause and then suddenly laughed. After a moment he said, "What you said makes sense." Yi curled her lips in the darkness. For some reason, Luchin seemed to be a little abnormal tonight. He was no longer as cold and taciturn as usual. Perhaps at this moment only Yi, a barbarian girl, was around. Or perhaps he was actually a little emotional, a little lonely, and occasionally in the dead of the night he would also want to find someone to talk to. "What do you think Huiyan will do to his son?" Luchin asked Yi. Yi was startled for a moment, and for a moment seemed to be shocked by this question. She only reacted after a while. Although she did not quite understand why this mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest would suddenly discuss this topic with her, Yi still tried hard to think and then shook her head. What can he do? That is his son. Besides, young Master Huaying did not really do anything wrong. At most he will be taught a lesson. Is that what you think? Lu Chen's voice sounded a little erratic. Yes. Yi suddenly felt a little guilty. She glanced at the shadow sitting in the darkness and said, "Is it wrong?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment and then said in a very flat tone, "I also don't know. Since I came to the southern wilderness, he is probably the only barbarian that I have not completely seen through. How far will he go? Actually, I am also a little curious," Lu Chen muttered in a low voice in the darkness. However, the last few words were spoken in such a low voice that only he could hear them. Yi tilted her ears, desperately trying to hear more but to no avail. She suddenly became a little annoyed, but did not dare to get angry at Lu Chen. She could only grit her teeth and bitterly curse in her heart, "These people are not good people." You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.